It's very true. When I was a kid, they were cartoons. Today, they're a cavalcade of dick jokes.
You know, that's terrible, but it does happen. All right, so for everyone, we apologize if this is you're not seeing this live or didn't get the chance to see this. We had to cut off a different stream, but you didn't miss anything important. We're just getting started anyway before we got hijacked. So we are here to discuss combat. Now, the default assumption with these things is because we're getting together from a group that is meant to discuss being a professional dungeon master for D&D, we are by default using D&D as an example, but most of these things will apply to any sort of combat you use in any sort of tabletop role-playing game, except the ones that Jay Kennedy knows that don't have combat in them. That one of these days he's going to have to host for us. We all want a role-playing game without.
Stories is fascinating to look at. I bought all the material, like all at once. Like that is the weirdest thing.
Which one is that, by the way? What's the name of that one?
Golden Sky Stories. It looks like this. It is just the cutest thing ever. It is adorable. And yeah, it has 2 pillars, not 3, like D&D. Exploration, social interaction, with social interaction being the top pillar. That's it.
Missing the combat portion.
There's a block of text about this big, which covers combat. And most of it is don't. If you must, here's this remaining bit is the mechanical for it. You use this roll or this roll against that roll or that roll. Everybody takes this punishment. That's it.
Wow.
Well, I want to, since we're just quick diversion to some different games. There's a game that just came out called Weirdwood Scouts of Weirdwood.
Okay.
And although I mean it's meant for kids or adults, and it does not you're like a Boy Scout, but you're a Weirdwood Scout, right? Mm-hmm. And you can be a Girl Scout or a Boy Scout or a non-gendered Scout, whatever, doesn't matter. And you have one rule, which is you cannot kill. So you can have combat. There is combat, but you can't actually. You're like not allowed to kill anybody. And they're like, anybody, even the giant troll. They're like, yup. You have to figure out some other
way. There is combat, but you can't kill.
Yeah.
Huh. It's an interesting.
That's a really interesting.
I can rough you up if you fall asleep, but I can't.
It's a bit like real life.
Yeah, sort of. That's really different if you actually kill them. Yes.
Right. Like in Pokemon, it's a KO. I don't care that he has 40 hit points.
Right.
99 damage. He's asleep, not dead. Right.
Right. And then they even go into like, well, he's a tree because it's like no sentient creature,
Right. Define, can you kill a zombie?
Right. So, it's a pretty interesting concept, but I know we're diverging from.
Yeah, right. Oh, I'm all about divergence.
No, but here's the thing. That's what brings up an interesting point. And this still does pertain to combat, is that it is a pillar of the game, at least for most RPGs, for most tabletops. Right. But why does it happen? Why is it such a pillar? Because narratively, it is generally just a conflict. It's a thing to resolve, and you do it with dice rolls. But it ends that part of the story. Normally, nothing. The climax of a story is never just I killed the big boss. It's I had to solve this problem by killing the big boss, which is different. Whereas the example you're putting in there is that one of the things Jay had said is you can avoid combat entirely, or you can avoid the consequences of killing someone or otherwise. And there's even rules for non-lethal damage. But what would be the advantage of changing the motivation for combat? And Paulo, I what's the name of the game that you were mentioning?
Weirdwood Scouts. It's like Weirdwood with Y. Right.
That's cool.
Weirdwood Scouts. So I'm assuming then that it turns kind of combat into more of a narrative tool. It's like, okay, we had to incapacitate this thing, but as we go on, that thing is going to come back because, of course, we didn't kill it. How did we leave things off, and is that going to fill a narrative purpose?
And that's the whole point, because if you're not just killing you're solving the problem by doing away with something, you have to figure out some other way, because though they will come back, you only have put off the problem or something like that. So you're less likely to start combat and you're gonna think of some other way to solve it aside from conk them on the head. You
So,
know,
if
Because
I can
what-
jump in for a second, superheroes have existed for a long time at this point, and
True.
almost never does a villain die or does a hero die, and when they do they stay dead. Green Goblin has been giving Spider-Man a hard time for like 75 years. like,
and they
and they fight all the
at
time.
each
Like,
other
the city
a lot.
takes massive damage. That's a big fight, and neither one of them die.
right.
I also think that if on the tactical end, on the realism and immersion end, almost nothing wants to die unless you're inherently suicidal, or you're a thing like a golem, or which has no mind of its own, or something
Right.
like I usually treat my orcs like zealots. They will absolutely die for the cause. They're all ready to do it. Because if they die, they're martyrs and they get what they want in the afterlife. Orcs are absolutely willing to die for the cause, but goblins or kobolds, even things like aboleths and tarrasques, they don't want to die. Anything that's a safe bet is you can assume that anything that is alive and self-aware would like to stay that way. So once it gets its ass
Sure.
kicked enough, it will deliberately try and pull out of the fight. Like
Well-
goblins, if a goblin stands and dies, that's not realistic. If that were true, then goblins wouldn't be alive for you to fight because they would have lost to some other wild creature by now. They're not really strong. They're not really fast. They don't have a natural advantage that places them above the other things that they live in harmony with in, say, Faerun, which is the most popular D&D setting to date. They live in the holes in the forests with lots of other things like dwarves that lives in the holes in the forests. If everything fought until it died, Faerun would be a much less populated place by the time your player characters get to it.
So now you do make one good thing is that one is the things that happen in the world that you're inhabiting, and the other thing is the extraordinary things that your players do because they are meant to be outside the norm.
Right. They're
So
better than the every monkey. Right.
So it's not that every person who goes out into the forest kills goblins. It's some people who go out to the forest, they'll deal with the goblins without killing them because they don't want to get into that sort of scrappy fight. But your heroes in particular, these guys do. These guys are the exception to that rule. So that's one way to view it. But what I was gonna point out is that if I've never personally been in a real life fight. I've done martial arts for years and I've done a couple of tournaments, but we're never actually trying to, do any serious damage. But one thing that is true is that when you have beaten someone, when you've defeated someone, you don't have to kill that person.
No, you don't.
And generally, and this is something that I believe I saw in a documentary once, I can't remember the name, is that generally when you have defeated an opponent,
mm-hmm.
you don't want to kill them or you don't want to put them into the position where you think they're going to be killed because that will make them more aggressive and give them another chance to damage you.
Agreed.
So one of the things that I think that is worth considering when you're designing your combat scenario for your game is that if the opponents defeat the heroes, you're not necessarily taking it easy by not killing the heroes. You're giving the opponents the chance to not be killed by saying, they're subdued. We don't need to kill you. If you continue fighting, you're probably going to lose, but we don't want to continue fighting either. And
Right.
it's still realistic because if I start, because that's the thing, unless you literally leave someone unconscious, if they think that the threat is over, they will stop attacking you too, even though they're defeated. But if they think the threat continues because they're gonna die, they will continue to attack as well.
Right.
So it's a consideration about realism that if you explain, I'm assuming that if you explain that to your players, you're gonna say like, I'm not taking it easy on you. But the more they attack you, the more they know they're going to get attacked, and they're not stupid. They know they also don't want to die.
I agree, and I think that's an important detail for realism and tactical deployment of your creatures. Almost nothing runs in there and just takes punches till it dies, unless its strength and con score suggests that that's what it does. So Keith Amon makes a blog called "The Monsters Know What They're Doing." I bought the book version
Love it.
not that long ago. It is a brilliant book.
Everyone
absolutely illness, you should. It's a brilliant book.
Audiobook for me, I gotta tell you.
Oh, is there an audiobook? Okay.
There is an audiobook, and you can skip to the chapter of the monster that you want to and just listen to it.
Oh,
so
very
for
cool.
me,
Did you
that helps me.
read and or listen to the section called "Why These Tactics"? That's probably my favorite part of the whole book.
Absolutely so.
So,
And
go ahead.
And one of the things that he points out in there, and again, you're on point with your references, by the way.
Thanks.
Is that there's a difference between a creature that does this normally, or a creature that's put into a situation that normally they wouldn't fight an adventure. So goblins, this is their thing. They hijack, caravans. They ambush. So they have the tactics included in their description that will help them do that. Whereas a Tarrasque, which is what you came up with, there's no strategy to it. All it does is go and eat.
It's got an intelligence of 3. It's dumber than your average dog. They're dumb as nails. Like they're enormous too. So and stupid durable. So they haven't from a evolution standpoint. They have
correct evolved creatures, either evolved or not. Mm-hmm.
Right. They don't have to adapt. Look at the thing. Almost nothing can harm a Tarrasque. Actually, a surprising number of damage types affected Tarrasque. But it has so many hit points, and it's so big, and it's so terrifying that I imagine almost nothing stands like on purpose to engage in combat with a Tarrasque until it or that thing is dead over the course of the eons that Tarrasque has existed. So essentially, it hasn't had to evolve. So it's still dumb as nails.
It still is. For sure. If you win every fight by punching, you don't have to evolve a different strategy.
Right.
You're just winning every fight anyway.
Right.
For sure.
Why are we talking about One Punch Man or?
Right.
That too.
He's never going to become 3-Punch Man because it's not a problem. He's never going to become, hey, whoa, let's talk about this man, because he's never going to fight.
And that's One Punch Man is a kind of an interesting point where his story is not about his combat,
which is brilliant.
Like superhero comic books are like bam, pow, whoosh, and sure, you'll read pages of combat, in a comic book.
Right.
Whereas One Punch Man's like, oh God, this again. Punch.
A friend of mine talked me into, well, sort of. So I went to a friend's house. Her husband was there. So she is more of a friend with my wife than she is with me. We're friends, but I mean, she and my wife just wandered off into the room, and here I'm stuck with a husband I've never met. And he goes, hey, you like anime? And I said, yes. And in less than 10 seconds, we're watching the first episode of One Punch Man. And I didn't really have the heart to go, and it's on. And we finished the first episode, and I went, deep emotional thought in a shonen anime. Well, I'll be. Let's watch the next one. And the next one. And I was like, wow, this has emotional depth, and he doesn't actually want to hit anybody. And he is constantly concerned about whether or not he's the villain because he gave up his friends and his family and his emotional support group and his job, and he gave up everything for what is basically power. Sounds like a villain to me. Right? Like, that's really deep. I'm impressed.
He's a villain in his mind, but he does punch for good.
Right, he does, but he feels all ugly about it.
Right?
And I mean, you got nobody. What's your power worth if you don't have anybody? He's not protecting anybody specific. He doesn't have an Aunt May. He doesn't have the Kents. He doesn't have anything like that because he gave all that up for power. And that's you sound like Dr. Doom. No, that's not true. Dr. Doom has his mom.
That's true. That's I had never. You know what? I need to revisit that anime because I didn't get that.
No, I didn't continue to watch it beyond that point. Maybe he develops family and friends or something.
No idea.
But
no idea.
In the opening round, he doesn't have any of that.
So here's actually I'm starting to think that you actually are looking at the questions that I have for this, because the next one is, well, when do you decide that the situation merits to go into combat? So
I think that depends very much on what you're playing and or what you are. If you're me and you're playing the kobolds, the hive is everything. Kobolds will, so my kobolds do not fight other people unless they have at least 3-to-1 odds in their favor, which is to say 3 kobolds to every adventurer, at least 3. Because kobolds are tiny and they're not going to win on a one-on-one fight, and they know it. They don't have Because, and that's an important detail. I think if you're going to look at them, I make all my monsters from scratch. But if you're not going to do that because you don't want to, because you don't feel comfortable, you don't feel confident, you don't have the time, any number of reasons, the monster manual for 5e and any other edition of D&D, and really any monster book, the stat block will tell you how this monster should fight. Never mind the descriptive text, look at the math. If its strength and constitution score are really high, then it stands and fights physically. It stands there and just does this,
Sure.
or whatever it does. If it's got a high dex score and a low con score, it probably doesn't stand there and go like this. So for me, kobolds are intelligent. They're not really intelligent, but they're fairly intelligent. They have a reasonably high dex score. They have a kind of a crummy everything else, which means that they're smart enough to know what they're good at, and that's it. They have dark vision. They have pack tactics, which means they're not going to fight you anything less than 3-on-1. Preferably, they're going to do it in the dark. And they're not going to do it at all unless they have a reason to. They need food. You have some. You're within 100 feet of the hive, and they don't really care whether or not you know it or not. That's too close. That sort of thing. But I think every monster has a reason that it fights. Golems are simple, right? Because their creator told them to. but aside,
no, here's the thing. That's the actual monster that's doing the fighting. My question goes a little bit more, is that when does the interaction, you're playing D&D, you're role-playing the thing, or you're going over stuff, and when does it turn into, when do you say like, okay, this is going to be resolved by a combat scenario? So for example, this is the traditional thing that the heroes get called into the king's room because, well, not the room, the king's throne room.
Right.
Where there are guards, and it's not just the king and the queen and armed adventurers, obviously. But the things devolve. Bluff checks are failed. Diplomacy is out the window, and the guards are like, no, seize these people, take them to the dungeon. When does it become like, okay, this is going to be a combat scenario because the guards come over and they try to hold on to the players? And the characters in this case, and the characters are being walked down out of the room and into the dungeon. When does it become combat? After the first punch, like this guy elbows the guard and says, no one touch me. Roll initiative, or is like, no one touch me. All right, just roll 1d4 for the damage. But the guard says, hey, and just tries to do it again. When do you say roll initiative is my question. And when do you just continue it as a series of kind of like interactions or skill challenges?
Paul, do you want to get in on that? I feel like we haven't included you.
Sure. Oh no. Well, I mean, I thought this was your talk, but
no.
I usually would do I kind of have like I guess it's the surprise round. Basically, like if somebody says, if you're in this situation, okay, this hypothetical. The guards have surrounded you. You should probably go along quietly, but you don't because,
you have to play
hero. And you throw an elbow really quick. I'm gonna let that be the surprise round, as it were. Even though like the guy might be a ranger and unsurprisable, but that's gonna be like the thing that starts it. That's usually the thing that starts it. And then we do initiative. So if you want to jump on somebody and leap from the sky and stab them, okay, we're technically not in combat until that happens. and then everybody initiative. And you know what? You might win initiative and be able to get another round in. So, you actually might go twice before anybody does anything because you were like, yeah, I elbowed him. And then you won initiative, and now I'm gonna grab his pole arm and smack him with it. Okay, try, and
okay.
You might win that. You probably won't, and you'll probably be stabbed to death by several guards because that was
the king's
move.
Right. So for me,
king's guards are not first level.
Oh no, for sure not. If it's the king's guard room, but for example, and a tavern brawl might be a better example for this. At what point did the person who didn't want to lose the bet, the NPC who's salty about losing all his money, throws a punch? Is that is roll for initiative, or are we when are we deciding that we're starting a combat versus
in something that's non-deadly, I would say, like in a brawl where somebody's like, flip the table over on him. We can role play that until somebody draws a knife, until somebody's like, "Oh, I'm gonna stab that dude," and you're like, "Oh, it just got real." Okay, because
Okay.
and I've had that plenty of times where, there was like a bar brawl, and it was like, "No, I've got to flip the table over on him," and then okay, well, everybody kind of reacts to that. I mean, it wasn't necessarily an attack to subdue or kill. It was just like, oh no, I leap up and chuck that table over, boom, and I leap back and see what happens. Then so they're people are getting prepared maybe for, oh, is this getting real?
This might evolve. Okay.
Yeah.
For me,
but I tend to role play it until it gets to the like, oh, okay, the serious damage, the D8s are coming out, and but that's my preference. That's my like kind of go to.
Yeah.
And a lot of times my players are so a lot of my players of my personal game are actually a lot of performers as well. So
Nice.
Everybody likes to role play. So
right. That's really cool.
Yeah, I mean,
for me, that's a two-part question. When you said when do you say roll initiative? What I heard was, when do we start combat for reals?
Exactly.
In regards to your previous question, how do I make combat faster? Don't use initiative. Don't throw it away. You don't need it. You don't want it. It takes too long. I don't care if it takes 10 seconds to count up everybody's number. That's 10 seconds you could have been playing. I also hate the cognitive dissonance that comes with initiative. A giant red reptilian beast fills the sky, lands in front of you, and breathes a jet of flame so hot, so close to you that it singes your metal armor. Let's stop and roll some numbers. Okay, now that we've rolled some numbers, let's fight the creature. That's incredibly annoying, and I hate it. Don't do that. But if the question is, so when you say roll initiative, never. But if the question is, when does it become a real fight? I guess that's moment to moment. I think I like Paul's idea. When somebody goes from looking to rough somebody up to looking to kill somebody. Like if somebody uses sleight of hand, if somebody uses mage hand, depends on what he's using it for. If somebody goes fireball, yeah, all right, that's real damage.
Right. That's everybody. Okay. And especially like people who are adventurers who are skilled at combat.
Right.
They're gonna like, I mean, I know some people who are like trained in the military and also, performers themselves who do acrobatics and things like that. It's like, as soon as that button gets pressed, they do heighten their senses. Things start to slow down. It's when that would have happened.
That little magic, it's real now. We've gone from a fight to like where somebody's walking away without any teeth to a fight where somebody's not walking away. Right.
So Jay, let me ask you, so what do you do if how do you order combat if you do not do initiative?
Depends if I'm in person or not. If I'm in person, we go around the table left to right. That's it. It gives the players all of the agency because they choose where they sit.
Right.
So if the healer wants to go last, not a bad idea. He sits to my right. And if the barbarian wants to go first, not a bad idea. He sits to my left. You tell them that up front, of course, so that they have agency. If it's on the computer, which is what we're doing right now, because COVID.
Right.
I usually go around a spread with the panels in front of me, but that doesn't work as well because if you sign off for a second and you pop back on, we can't control where you end up in the tiles.
Right. But for per combat, it could change anyway. So
right, it can change. There is that to the around the table angle. While it's much faster, you do lose some of the. Well, next turn he's going second thing.
Right.
One of my friends loves Greyhawk initiative. You re-roll initiative at the end of every round.
Oof, that's a little bit too much.
It's terrible.
I used to do because a million years ago when I was in high school, and sometimes I would run these games where a friend of a friend gets invited, and suddenly you're actually running a game for 10 people.
Right.
And I would just go around the circle. Like it was like, okay, we're in combat. Yeah, I would go around the circle. If I had a smaller group, I usually still do initiative because I don't know about if you've noticed, but when it's a like Pavlov's die rolling.
Oh, that's something
When
to be
you say
roll
roll
initiative, they
initiative.
sit up straight. Right. You don't have to lose that though.
You
You don't have to lose that. Roll initiative works as a Pavlovian bell because every time you say roll initiative, everybody knows what it means.
Sure.
So come up with a phrase you say whenever battle starts. Doesn't matter what it is. Transformers roll out, battle stations, Avengers assemble, whatever.
Right.
Pull the phrase out of your butt and say that phrase every time battle starts. And in 3 weeks, that Pavlov bell will be there too.
Right.
As long as
I
you
love
never lie about it. As long as you never go, Avengers assemble, just kidding. Right? As long as that never happens, it'll be fine. One of my favorite systems, ICRPG, does that with dice. So ICRPG has each die is used for a specific thing. The D20 is used to hit, obviously. D1 percentile die is how you get loot. Hank's system, he doesn't give you a custom piece of loot most of the time. You roll on a never-ending table, which means every single time your players pick up the percentile die, they know they're about to get a goodie bag. Pavlovian bell.
Right.
Not bad.
Right, exactly.
That's not bad at all, actually. So, and now, and this leads me to my literal next question. I do think about these things in order, by the way. Is what do you do when it's the other way around? When you had no idea this could even possibly end up in a combat situation, completely unprepared, but then the players say, "No, screw it! I am going to try to kill this insert NPC here." Like when you're caught off guard, what do you do?
If say it's a life-threatening situation where the reason you assumed you didn't even consider there would be combat is because it's absolutely suicide. The King's Guard room, for example. There's 80 men. They're all covered in metal. Some of them probably have magic powers. They're the King's elite, right? Like I just watched Final Fantasy 15 Kingsglaive the other day. In the beginning of that movie.
I've not, but I have it on my watch list.
Okay, it's good. It's not as pretty as I was expecting it to be, given it is a Final Fantasy movie. That's usually the only thing they really have going for it. But it was fun to watch. And the knife magic is, oh, dude. Like I'm incorporating that in my game already. Oh, look at cool. So the Kingsglaive are they're elite troops who can dance all over the space through teleportation. They have magic powers. Some of them can shoot lightning. It's a whole thing. There's like 30 of them. For an elite guard, we're not talking 4 of your best men. We're talking enough men to fill any one room. A crowded bus station's worth of men. and they all have magic powers. And if one of the NPCs in the village decided to attack one of them, well, they're gonna die. Because the Kingsglaive are just gonna shred them to pieces. So in a situation like that, if your players choose to pick a fight that there's no reasonable capacity for them to win, which is how come you didn't consider that it would turn into a fight, then you've got a couple of options. Up front, just narrate what happens. That absolutely restricts their agency and they don't have any. After they said, I want to do this thing. I mean, if you want to say, are you sure? There's an art to doing that without popping out of game to say, hey guys, you're going to die. Are you sure? But if you want to, do it. After that, you've double checked their agency. They're grown-ups. Narrate what happens. If you want to give them a reasonable opportunity for success, which is to say like 1%, because this is a fight they should not have picked, which is to say they have some shot, not no shot. Roll it out, but don't lie about it. I'm all for fudging dice most of the time. In a situation like that, though, they've chosen to execute their agency. If you fudge dice, so you lie about it, you're undermining the choice they made. So it's not really fair. And I don't know. If they're going to pick a fight they're not supposed to win, I guess it's what kind of hero you had.
They're supposed to win, and then there's like, they ain't no chance of winning.
Right.
Yeah. It's like, yeah, and I totally agree. I'm pretty much there. I'm trying to think, like, we had a thing where it was turned into a situation like Han Solo and Greedo. The whole party was there. Crossbows are like pointed. People are like, is this happening? Is this happening? And then literally somebody cast a spell to make the guy's crossbow go off. Little mage hand, tink action.
Ooh.
And it was hilarious because we all were like, what?
That's great.
So surprise, point blank, shoots him with a crossbow, blah, blah, blah.
Wow.
That's great.
and he's like, it wasn't me. Yeah, well, sure looked like it. And
It sure did look like it.
it's like that was your crossbow bolt. That was you. We all saw you. And
Right? Are you really gonna believe the
cool.
crossbow went off by itself? Right?
yeah, it just went off by itself. And now, of course, like that was a few weeks ago. So his crossbow has gone off by itself 3 times now. Just
It's faulty. He needs a new one.
it's like you gotta fix that thing, man. That thing's.
I've also been known to use the invisible benefactor. So say the king, say you attack the king personally in his throne room. His men come to kill you immediately. Well, of course they do. He's the king.
Right. They're probably already there.
They're probably already there, right? They take 2 steps forward and stab you in the face. And as they're busy pummeling you into jelly, somebody speaks into the king's mind, and you don't really know this yet. You watch the king's eyes light up for a second. He does like this social security thing that he doesn't need to do. And he goes, whoa, stop. Put your weapons down. Let them go. Escort them out of the castle. Well, you have your players' attention now. I mean, don't do that all the time because you'll feel like you're undermining their agency. But if you do that a couple of times every now and again, that's plot, man. Like who is powerful enough to tell the king to stand down when his life was in danger? Do you remember the episode of I think it's the first season of Sherlock? Moriarty is gonna just blow Sherlock and what's his name, Watson, to pieces. And he's got like a bomb vest on him, and there's a million like scopes on Sherlock, and this is it, it's over. And then he gets a phone call, and he goes like this, and all the snipers that you can't see don't shoot, right? And when he finishes the phone call, he goes, oh, but like on the phone call, you hear him going, but I really wanted, but okay, fine. And he closes up the phone, and he says, let him go, leave. And he just wanders away. I don't know about you, but you had my attention. Who the hell is capable of telling Moriarty to cut it out? Like he's Moriarty. Like a king is kind of like that, who's in a position to tell him to cut it out. Or your guys are encountering bloodthirsty homicidal goblins that are all 8 feet high because the scientists mutated them, so they're all like mini.
Sure.
And they're going to die. They're going to be cavalcades of just cavities in the floor. And an arrow flies by and kills one of those goons, and the goons go, "Ooh," and they go wander off to see whatever that is. Who fired it? Don't know. Just don't do it all the time, or your players will feel like you're coddling them. Which they might.
I mean, I would think something like that. For me, I mean, I write these crazy plots or whatever, and mostly they're just rip-offs of William Shakespeare plays, but you make it so weird and convoluted.
You've got lots of rope there.
Oh yeah, there's so much things going on there. Like I have a couple players who go, wait a minute, was that Love Labor's Lost? And I was like, yeah, you totally like 8 weeks.
I've done a Midsummer's Night Dream on occasion.
Right, it's like the lesser known plays.
It dawns on them later.
Yeah, they're like, wow, that was kind of like Romeo and Juliet, where all the families were. Oh, that was Romeo and Juliet.
You son of a bitch! Right.
I did it again.
For that. Pick an episode. Doesn't even matter which one. Pick an episode.
Right.
And in my experience, if you change the gender of somebody, nobody notices.
Absolutely.
I don't know why that is. If you make Captain Kirk voice and all, and you put him in your game, but it's Captain Kirk and she's, I don't know, 3 feet high and female, and you're done. Your players will never know the difference.
Right. Well, so was usually there's room in my plots to have that random arrow fire that prevents the players from getting mauled because that's not what the plot was going to be. So normally I'd say like, normally there's room for that in my games as opposed to trying to make up something on the spot as far as like well, who is that random arrow person? It's like, well, actually I already have kind of those things in my games already where not to say that there's like, and your secret benefactor is this guy or whatever, but there is like a possibility of like not just pulling it out of your hat, just like, but like, oh yeah, by the way, you do have an affiliation with this thieves guild
organization thing,
yeah, and so sure, you're in that city of them. Oh, you know what? The top guy of that guild that you are associated with does, he was like, he happened to be hanging out on his rooftop and was like, the heck is that? And saved you. Right. And then later on they're like, oh yeah, by the way, remember that day when I saved you? Okay, so here's what you got to do for me now.
Exactly. Right.
And,
Nice.
If you
and
save
boom.
them, you
Yeah.
can turn that into an you owe me. Right.
Right. Which I do, by the way, all the time. And my players are like, don't take gifts from those people. Don't. Why are you?
Right.
And they,
Don't. Right. Like, no.
half the
Okay.
half the
Ain't
group
nothing
is like,
free. Right.
yeah, half the group is like, oh, thanks for the cloak. That's the most amazing. It's a beautiful. And the other guy who's in the party is just like, don't do it.
And the
What
guy
do
who
you-
handed the cloak is like going, suckers. Right. Like,
and
I think another part of tactics is if it's treat the creature is going to sound like I'm being a douche, but if your players are fighting, aim to kill them until such time that if that's something that creature would do. A golem, if a golem is told to flatten that adventurer, play it like it. It's a golem. It doesn't have, well, he's bleeding to death now, I can stop. He's terrified, I care. No, it's a golem. You flatten them until they're jelly or they kill it. It's a giant golem. It's how they function.
The only variation I emphasize on that one is, for example, my players just went against a couple of Displacer Beasts last time we played.
Ooh.
And the Displacer Beasts have multi-attack.
Right.
And I declare the attack before I roll it. So it's like, if you went down with the first one, the second one is a failed death save. That's it. Right. I do not like, oh, well, he hit you with one, he saw you went down and then didn't hit you with the other. No, he's going to hit you with both no matter where you are.
That comes up a lot. I get a lot of, if a player, how do you guys determine what your monster does? If a player goes down, does it hit him again? Does he move on to the next one? For me, I think that depends on the creature.
Absolutely.
It depends on, for me specifically, how good its wisdom score is. So in Keith Amon's blog, which I think is a really great tool for this, he suggests that the wisdom score of a monster, if it's, I think, 7 or less, has exactly one modus operandi and is incapable of adapting if it doesn't work. They'll just keep trying the same thing or run away, also built into their wisdom score. When do they know that this isn't working out? He manifests that as once you've lost a certain percentage of your hit points.
True.
Not winning.
Now, here's the thing.
They're intelligent. That's like 10%.
I find that very hard to keep track of when I'm DMing, because I don't have the stat sheets of all of the monsters in front of me at all times. I only have the stat sheet of the one that I'm currently using to attack and otherwise, which is why I actually do roll initiative for monster types, so that all the drow went at the same time.
Okay.
And then some heroes went, and the Displacer's Beast went, so that I don't have to do like group all of them, all the drow and all the Displacers. I don't do group initiative just because I have to switch information palettes. But for example, I'm going to give the example of what happened to my game on Thursday.
Please.
They were coming into literally a dungeon, and this was a treasure room with the bones of a dead dragon covered in gold coins. Awesome. But who was there? There was a hole in that entrance, and that's where the drow were coming out from. Well, so they came out with some Displacer Beasts. There's some giant spiders, and the illusionist wizard player made an illusion of a baby Displacer Beast trapped in the web, which I thought was brilliant. That was like, that will get the Displacer Beast attention. So the way that I played it for the Displacer Beast is that they were going to try to help the cub first, and so they kind of formed around it. There was 2 Displacer Beasts, one on each side, and when someone came in to attack them, they would defend themselves. But once that creature was knocked out, and this is exactly what happened, they knocked him out, and then the second attack was, with that failed death save. They stepped back and went back to the illusion instead of continuing the attack, which is what they would normally have done. And that is not because of their wisdom or other score, which I didn't have in front of me. It's simply because the situation merited that that's what they would reasonably do.
Sure.
Whereas the drow were like, fresh, like, no, stupid beasts attack, and the beast wouldn't. It was like,
right.
Wait, what?
Now,
I mean,
here's a question.
say what I mean?
How did you decide? I think that sounds cool. It's probably how I would have done it, but not because the Displacer Beast automatically cares about its young, because your players were creative, and I would have wanted to endorse that. Not everything cares about its young. Quokkas are adorable. They're so adorable that it's like Skull Hell Island. It's a real place in Australia, and these little adorable creatures called quokkas live there. They look like koalas that have an Instagram filter on them all the time. They're ridiculously adorable. And if a quokka, like people go to the island, almost all their money comes from tourists who go to the island to like pet them and snuggle them and love them and take photos with them. They're a wild animal. It's not like they keep them as pets. If a quokka feels threatened, it will throw its young at the thing that is attacking it and run away. So not all things that live that have young, which are most things that I imagine all things that live, um, care about their young. That's just a romantic, happy thought. It's not necessarily true. So you automatically deciding that this place should be cares about its young speaks to your inner good person. Good for you. but it's not necessarily true. It's not objectively a fact. I would have done that because players got creative and fucking roll with it.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, sure, you can justify it however you want, but as in you can justify the action of the monster however you want, as long as you reward them for the thing that they did. Like, that was creative. I'm going to do some mental gymnastics to make that work in plot. That's what I mean by justify it however you want. But yeah, it's going to work because I thought it was a good idea.
Like, if goblins are attacking my players, so I should open a disclaimer. None of my tables are the same. None of them. So when I say my goblins, what I'm really saying is my goblins that one time. There's no guarantee they're ever going to be that way again. Depends on the group and the table and the phase zero and everything we've agreed on. I don't have a resting world. I don't have resting monster tactics. I don't have any of that stuff. Like I had a player for a while who just didn't want to die, period. He comes for the power fantasy, which means death isn't really on the table for him. And he doesn't really want to think in combat. So everything stood there and played punch for punch until it died. I didn't think that was fun at all, but he had a blast. So, so goblins, for me, the crucial distinction between goblins and kobolds is that kobolds are ultimately a team in small groups and the hive as a whole. Goblins aren't. If three goblins attack you, and you kill one of them, and through whatever happens, the dead goblin is next to the two live goblins, and he hand out shiny thingy. Those goblins will quickly look at you, decide whether or not you're hunting them next. If they think you're not, if they think there's a reasonable chance they can grab the shiny thing and then run away, they will. They will loot their fallen comrade rather than fight with you. And they don't care that he fell in battle. They give this many craps that their brother George fell. This doesn't change if that goblin that fell is their own child. They don't care. So I think a lot of tactics come from the behavior and social structure of the monster that you have. The 5e monster manual irritates me when it comes to the Minotaur, because on the one hand it says they're cursed beings, on the other hand it says they can breed with each other and thus have given rise to a whole race. Well, okay, which one is it? Like, and I think this matters.
Deep down inside, we're all cursed, really. So.
Right. Emo.
There you go.
Right. And I think it matters for tactical support. If the Minotaurs aren't very bright, their wisdom score is surprisingly high, but their intelligence score is like, I don't know, an 11 or a 7 or something. It's not very high. So if your Minotaur, surely it wasn't that dumb in life when it got cursed into being a Minotaur. Let's assume that it wasn't. Let's assume it was a mighty powerful mage for a second. Its intelligence was 18. Well, now that Minotaur probably has a deep-seated hatred against things that are smart, in the same way that a zombie, in theory, has a hatred of things that are alive. It just inherently is jealous. But if a Minotaur was born that way, probably no hatred. That hatred probably affects how it fights in combat. If you look smart, Minotaur's probably attacking you first, if it's a cursed one. If not, I don't know, its intelligence is like a 7. The one that looks the biggest must be the most dangerous. That's not necessarily true, but to the mind of a simple creature, that's, I mean, the big one's the scary one, right? If you look like Conan is terrifying looking to me, and I'm a relatively intelligent man. But I also know that if you're throwing a ball of light back and forth that I recognize as fire, you are probably more dangerous than Conan, because Conan really only has a couple of tactics. He has to touch me, for starters. That guy doesn't. Like, then that guy can kill me in one shot. Conan at least has to get within melee range first.
Yeah.
But if
I want to
you-
go back to the
Go ahead,
displacer beats though, that concept.
Hmm.
What, as a dungeon master, you know, if your players do this trick where they're like, all right, baby cub, you know,
That's very smart, by the way. I love
and which I love, by the way, and I would totally go with that.
very slick.
You know, you have a choice as the dungeon master to decide how you want to play that, and of course, you know, you're saying, well, some animals do, and I think kangaroos do that too. Not to like begrudge creatures from Australia, but
It's an odd
but,
place.
yeah, it's just like, oh my god, we'll make another one. But you can say, you can look at a displacer beast and say, cat like, and then just go with cat, what you know about cats.
Right.
Like cats, you know, cat moms tend to be a little defensive, and
Right, they
you know,
care.
a lot of defensive. And so, you know, so you can just play, you go, all right, well, it's mostly like a cat, let's just do it like a cat.
Right.
As far as like what would you do as a dungeon master, how you would decide to play that out, that's what I would do. I go, yeah, let's just go with feline characteristics, you know, and go from there.
You have a really
and
great
so-
point there,
yeah.
because sometimes people don't have enough time to figure out the society and development and
Right,
evolution
like
of
hang
their-
on while I write a backstory for everything. So
Right. That's why the Minotaur bothers me, because in order to understand how its tactics might work, you have to decide at least whether or not this one is a cursed one,
Yeah.
or a Minotaur like race creature.
right,
Whereas
it is now, I think, in the Mythic Odysseys of Theros.
Theros.
oh yeah, how is that?
I think it's pretty cool. I'm
Right.
actually this is
I got this thing for Greco-Romans.
yeah, I mean, it's a whole other side story because not to plug all of my stuff, but
That's
what
fine.
I do is I give tours to Europe because I do a lot of Renaissance fairs. I'm a performer at Renaissance fairs mostly.
That's very
And
cool.
so the
Love
past few years, I have been doing tours where I take people, because I also perform in Europe at medieval festivals and Baroque festivals. They even have a Rococo festival, by the way, just if you're really interested in Rococo, the 20 minutes that it was in style during the 1700s. But they do have a whole festival about it.
That's cool.
So I'll take people to these cities and gorgeous castles and towns, and so that was, you know, I'm a little bit of a history nerd, so
Very cool.
so we would do this.
Eventually, you're gonna learn it if you keep doing that. So yeah.
Right. And but then as I've been doing these tours for a few years, you know, of course, I'm talking to the people who are on these tours, and most of them come from the Renaissance fairs. And then, of course, if you come from the Renaissance fairs, there's a certain high percentage of people who play role-playing games. So, of course, I'm sitting here talking. You know, we have a group of maybe 12 to 16 people, and you know, we're chatting a few days into the tour, and it's like, oh, well, yeah, I play D&D. Well, yeah, I play D&D. There was 6 people there who were like, can we just play D&D? And I was like, yes.
Yes, we can. Yes,
and
yes, we can. I'm
so-
always
Yes, we
prepared.
can.
So now I do tours that are, I mean, we honestly, we go to almost as many places. We'll go out to a castle in the morning, we go back for lunch, and then we play D&D at night, and the castle is part of the game that we play.
Oh, that's
Sure.
cool.
And so you're like, yeah, you remember that chasm that, you know, you think your character is going to jump across the moat? Do you remember the moat that we saw? The real moat. Okay.
That is
Think
cool.
about that. That's why the DC is at 30. You know,
I think that's a really important point.
That is cool.
Sometimes players don't have a real world syntax for how big or how small or how
Absolutely.
big the thing is. Like a Skarask is what, 50 feet high and 70 feet long?
yeah,
How many people do you know that can actually visualize exactly what 50
Right.
feet looks like? That's big.
Not really.
Sure.
Bigger than maybe any sign you've ever seen. That's
you-
that's big.
gone to maybe the DC, you know, the Smithsonian, and seen the whale that's there, and gone,
Right.
it's bigger.
It's bigger, right? 50 feet is big. Like,
Oh yeah.
so I found something that really worked for me. You take tape, you take a 5-foot piece of tape, you take 4 of those, and you make the square
Square.
on the ground, and you stand one of your players in it. and then you have them look down and see it, and that grants a huge amount of, oh, right, because a surprising number of people can't read a tape measure, which suggests that they don't really know how long 1 foot is or how long 5 feet is, let alone something. I mean, a Tarrasque is like a mountain with teeth.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh yeah.
it's Godzilla. It's enormous.
That point though of like being able to see really, one of the castles that we go to is part ruin, part fully together.
I
And
imagine lots of castles are like that.
Yes, they are. So there's like a whole tower that used to have a spiral staircase, which by the way is super cool, and I use this in my game like almost every day. It used to have a spiral staircase in it, but it's gone. Right.
Okay.
So all there are is the parts of the wall where the stones had slid into to make the staircase. And I was like, are you gonna climb that? And I mean, it's just little edge holds.
Right. This is some Uncharted video game stuff.
Absolutely. And I was like, man, that it's real. First of all, it's super cool that you're like, oh, this actually kind of exists. And then you really get the hang of like just how hard that would really be.
Ugh.
Oh yeah.
Like, ooh, man, in armor and everything, like, I've done a little rock climbing, but holy moly, this would be insane. And again, this is why the DC is 25. So
Right.
Yeah.
As hard as nails. Right.
Yeah.
But because you're an adventurer, right? You're not.
Right. You can do it. It's possible.
Maybe. Right.
So, yeah. But so all right,
you need
so
a hell
going
of
back again
a
to the displacer
roll,
beast
for sure.
and multiple attacks. I wanted to make a little point about that because as a player character gets up to 5th level as a fighter, you get 2 attacks per round. Now, you're not necessarily going to attack the same person. And again, I would say that is a good like wisdom, intelligence, natural combat skill that you're like, I'm going to hit this guy over here, but this guy is also a danger. Maybe I should swing it this way. And you have the time and the speed to do it as a 5th level fighter.
Right. Because multi-attack, you're getting those attacks in this round.
They're not all happening at the same moment.
Right.
But for instance, a displacer beast where they get claw bite and they get the little flappy things.
All they get, so in 5th edition, all they have is their tentacle attacks. They don't even get a bite.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Huh.
Let me
Well, not my displacer beast.
Huh.
Oh, I'm all about the claw bite. So
Yeah.
So,
I remember 3rd edition where everything that could grapple was going to like everything.
So I would say like in that instance though, like the claw bite for a cat animal would happen. The cat's not gonna like claw somebody over here, claw somebody over there, and bite somebody over here. They're gonna claw and then bite that same person.
Right.
But a displacer beast has a little flappy arms, and so they might, because a cat is gonna try to defend itself if and it's gonna wave off anybody else attacking it with those other flappy their appendages. So like while they're trying to maul you here, and then they're just gonna like, so
just keep away.
right. And so those are the 2 attacks that I would say they go somewhere else, unless there was only one opponent, and then man, you are screwed.
In the particular case that my game on Thursday, it was just one opponent who came up to the thing. So what I did is I didn't stop it from doing the 2nd attack to that creature. But you do bring up a good point. I mean, it could have attacked 2 different ones, and that's absolutely fine. But the reason that I declare what the attacks are at the beginning is because I don't want to have the players feel like, oh, he just really doesn't want to kill us. Like, nope, this thing is going to attack you with its attacks. Dice will decide if it kills you or not, but this is what it decided to do. And it doesn't change its mind depending on how effective it was. It just goes all out.
Right.
Especially if it's a displacer beast or something that's like that. If it's a guard, for example, and you fall on the floor, it's a human against a human, or a human against an elf, or whatever you want to call. Then it might discern like, okay, it's on the floor. I don't need to do a killing blow. But a beast, a monster that's trying, it's like, no, it's just gonna go. Maybe on the next round it won't attack you again if you're on the floor, but this one, it's just gonna go all out.
Oh yeah. I think that on the subject of tactics and the difference between, say, beasts and men, I think bringing terrain into it is a great idea. On the subject of beasts, I think an ankheg, everyone, the giant cockroach with acid spray. Uh, so for me, an ankheg is a dumb creature. Look at it. It's dumb. Its intelligence score is not particularly bright. It's a mechanistic brute. So for me, if your party ever encounters an ankheg that's already above ground and isn't eating something, isn't in the process of trying to get something to eat, that didn't make any sense. So ankhegs travel underneath the ground. They burrow. That's because their burrow speed is so good. But they want to be able to grab a thing, bite it, and then go back down on the same turn. Because anything that can take damage is probably smart enough to know when it's taken damage. Even really, really dumb creatures, if you slap them and they go ow, won't want to do that again. So an ankheg preferably would like to pop up, get its food, and leave now. Which means, because of how movement speed works, it needs to travel probably no more than 10 feet below the surface of the ground at any given time. So if your players encounter, example A, your players are walking through the forest, they encounter an ankheg. They attack the ankheg. They kill the ankheg. Example B, your players are walking through the forest. The ground erupts underneath them. The ankheg immediately takes a bite attack. Let's say it pulls that off. It immediately gets a free grapple, and it immediately goes back underneath the surface of the planet because it has its lunch. Why on earth would it stay here?
Right.
I suppose you could think that an ankheg is dumb, so it would stand above ground to eat until one of the other players hits it. And then it goes, oh, I'm out of here, and then goes back underground. And that's the same creature with the same powers. And that second fight is way more terrifying, particularly the player who got grappled, because now he's 10 feet under the surface of the planet.
Right.
You have to get around to get to him.
You don't have to complicate it even that much. And again, my last Thursday encounter was fantastic, by the way.
I'm glad you liked it.
What the reason there were webs is because there was giant spiders. So giant spiders webbed one of the characters. They dragged him deep into the web.
Ooh.
So that's like, you're already, the web attack from the spider, it didn't grapple, restrained them. Right. And then the other spider, perfect, restrained in a cocoon, boom, there we go. And now it's deep in the web. And for every 5 feet of web, and this is the rules as they are in 5th edition, they have to either break it, rip it, or otherwise. So when the spider takes you into a square that is surrounded by another 8 squares of web, you are losing a lot of rounds just getting out there. And that's something that the spider would do. And it's not killing the player, it's not anything, but it is something that they have to start solving. So yeah, you don't have to just have everyone just attack at once and just stand and be punched. No, do the things that they're supposed to be doing. And whether it be an ankheg or it could be a displacement, it doesn't matter. Make it so that it's reasonable that that's how they would do things, unless they are being commanded. So what I mean by that is, okay, you have 5 goblins, but you have you have a bugbear behind them telling them what to do. Well, then yeah, they're probably not going to act like goblins. They're going to act like soldiers. But if you just have the goblins doing their ambush, they will do the ambush tactics, not go in and be punched. See what I mean? And that's the only one. But now, and before we could go on this all day. Tactics are a thing that we could
talk about all day. If you were up for it,
players have a limited pool of resources.
They do.
Whether they have.
You okay?
So the reason that it's cutting in and out, and again, I apologize. We've been having thunderstorms up here in Frederick all week, so my internet has been very dodgy. So they have a limited pool of resources. So how many combat encounters are you okay with in an adventuring day, or it's between long rests? And how liberal are you with, like, okay, we fought, long rest, we're doing this. So how do you handle recovery periods, whatever system you're using?
So for me, long rests are, I don't know a lot of mechanics, but if we're gonna talk about 5e,
recovery periods, like whatever mechanic there is to recover their resources.
Right. So a long rest I meet people that are like, well, if you just took if you just slept for 8 hours, you can't sleep for another 8 hours. That's not true. You can just will yourself to do it. That's not true at all. And if you're remotely tired or depressed or you just want to try, you can go back to sleep. You shouldn't. There's such thing as overtired. You can really do yourself an unfavor by sleeping for 16 hours with a break in the middle, but you can. So if the players want to fight one fight against 4 hobgoblins and then go back to sleep for 8 hours, I don't reasonably have the capacity to tell them that they can't mechanically do that. Of course they can. So instead, if it matters, if I need them to feel like they need to go act so that they can't sleep instead, then provide a reason. Say, hey, look, they find on one of the hobgoblins letter that says it's a battle plan, and there's a nearby village that's going to be under attack, and you guys search the skyline, and there's a giant pillar of black smoke coming from where that you think that village is. The approximate direction on the crudely scribbled hobgoblin map. Yeah, you can go to bed now, but if you do, the village fights for itself. They can sleep. I'm just not and I mean it doesn't always have to be that high stakes. If they fought 4 hobgoblins and they burned off every last resource they have, let them. I don't know. Depends on the fight.
Yeah.
I do a lot of this village is on fire and this village is on fire. There are 4 of you. It's a half a day's walk to either one. Even if you ride, like you find mounts on the way there, you cannot get to both. What do you do? Like what village are you going to save? Or differently, this village is enormous. The southern docks and the northern watchtower are under attack. You probably don't have enough time to save both. Maybe you do. Find out. What do you do?
Yeah, it depends on the level of your players, obviously.
Right.
Like what kind of are they gonna swoop in like She-Ra and like literally do the whole battle? Or are you more of a like, this is a big town, you guys are maybe like 3rd or 4th level, you guys are going to defend this part of the wall,
right?
And that's it. You don't even
if a giant town
battle,
right? If there's a giant town, there's probably a city watch or guards or something like that.
Sure.
So it's not like the watchtower. If you choose the dock, the watchtower is completely undefended. But you and I both know all of those city guards are NPCs, which is not as cool as you are. So what's it going to be, hero? I mean, if they've agreed to be heroes, there's good guys and then there's champions. If you've agreed to be a champion, hard calls get made. Spider-Man doesn't get to save everybody. He's got a long list of people that are dead. Like that he failed. It's so much so that guilt is what drives his character. And he's my favorite, and he fails all the time. I don't like Superman because he never fails ever, and that's boring. There's no stakes there. Green kryptonite doesn't kill him, magic doesn't kill him, and his list of allergies is pretty short anyway. Like I don't know. But I think ultimately this all boils down to, as far as stakes, what kind of phase zero you had. If they want dungeon crawl, right, go down the holes, kill the monsters, get the loot, go back up, sell some loot, buy some new weapons maybe. If we're playing the first Diablo, then I don't know if you should have 2 villages burning at once, because that wasn't the plan. But if we're talking epic Game of Thronesy style campaign, then yeah, give them dramatic choices and let them live with them.
Okay. So interesting thing to think about, I got to tell you the truth, but it didn't really answer the question, or at least not what I thought it was asking.
Sorry, what was the question?
So I guess it's, so how many, either whether it be by encounters or by amount of monsters in the encounter or otherwise, how many do you put in between their times of rest? Like how do you avoid saying this was too little? I mean, in one day, all they did, and they had a combat encounter, but it was just 2 goblins, right, and they just ripped through it, and then, oh, well, they're back to 100. So the next time that they encounter 2 goblins,
I don't pick an objective number like that.
Yeah.
So I think dungeon. Oh, go ahead, Paolo.
Oh no, I was gonna say. I mean, I don't honestly plan my games that way. So I almost never do random encounters. I have because I have a little bit more, I would say more storyline. I have a pretty strong storyline that I would like the players to like. The players are involved in, you know. So I'm
Right,
like,
right.
I don't
Yeah.
have time for a random. I mean, if there is going to be an Ankeg trying to grab somebody, there's a deeper reason, or there's something that I need the players to find. Like they go after the Ankeg because it grabbed one of their buddies, and then turns out that tunnel was a lost whatever the heck, and the
Right,
players
right.
needed it. So it's always, even if it seems random, it
It's
will
not.
have something to do with the adventure that I've written, because it will lead to that lost temple that, you know, Blob has the thing that the, you know, whatever the storyline is.
Right,
So
they kill the Ankeg. They find an old disc in the tunnel, like a
Yeah.
big, like a stone disc, and 3 months later, it's actually the key to get them into the mystic magical temple.
right. And so it's never just 3 goblins or something like that. And if it is, yeah, those goblins have a message that they were trying to get through to the other goblins, and then we found that. So it's more about the storyline than about any encounter based things. I always try to throw in a nice big combat that, you know, that gets the players up and excited and firing magic missiles and whatnot.
Right.
But as far as, I mean, I've had literally entire sessions where I really thought they were going to go and do this thing and fight these
They
thieves.
didn't.
They ended up going shopping, and
It happens.
not
Oh, yeah,
even
for sure.
not even like shopping for like awesome magic items, but they went hat shopping, and not magic hat shopping, just hats. Just
Hey man, adventuring is a hard gig. I'm gonna
Right.
look my best. Okay.
I mean, now I do make it exciting. I have shops in my major cities called Lando Capes and
Lando
Horde
Capes.
Topic. Yes,
That's great.
and so you know, the Horde Topic,
Cool.
where all the like orcs and
Nice.
stuff like go and they get the wristbands with the barbed wire on it and stuff like that, and the spiky
That's great.
bracelets. You know, and my alchemical romance T-shirts. They do all that sort of stuff, and you know, so
Okay.
it is. I make it fun, but I mean, we've literally had entire scenario, an
Sessions,
entire
yeah.
game session where we just like went around and they met important NPCs that are going to be important later and things like that. It wasn't just a ridiculous shopping experience, although most of it
Right.
was. But so there's no hard and fast rule as far as that goes. Like,
Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess the reason I ask this is because most TPKs, which is a part of combat,
Right.
come from characters running out of resources and then running out of hit points. Because normally what happens, at least as far as my experience goes, is as long as they have their resources, their hit points don't matter. Because the heal will heal, the potions will potion, the thing. But once they don't have those, then the hit points don't come back up.
sure.
And that depends on, so the way I do it, and I've never done it any differently, and I guess I watched too many YouTube videos that thought this was important, is I keep track of time. And the rules in 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons say that you cannot benefit from a long rest until for every 24-hour period. So even if you sleep another 8 hours, you just slept, you don't get your hit points back. So like, I want to sleep another 8 hours, go for it. You're just wasting the day. That's fine.
Right.
And again, that's just because the rules are that way. But what happened, and again, this is the same group that we played with last week. A different group of adventurers TPK'd in this dungeon, same players, different adventures, because they went down the hole the Drow were coming out of, which I had not prepared. So I pulled up a map of a tunnel, and I started, plopping in creatures, and they kept going, and they kept going, and they kept going, and they kept going, and they kept going until they died. So the question kind of goes in, at what point, if what they're doing says, I want to keep this fight going, I want to keep this fight going, I want to keep this fight going, do you tell them stop, you're gonna die, or do you like well, in my case they TPK'd, by the way.
So for me, that absolutely depends on. I know I keep saying on phase 0, but it does. Everything's context specific. If your players, like, so the group that had the power fantasy player, death was not really on the table for him. It was on the table for everybody else, because everybody else wanted that. So for me, the table isn't a game, and I don't mean that in a, well, it's not a game, take it seriously. That's not what I meant. I meant from the definition of the word game. For something to be a game, it needs to have an object. It has to have an objectively agreed upon win-loss condition that everybody is familiar with before play starts. Checkers, chess, anything with a ball, hockey, pick one. Games have, everybody knows what it takes to win or lose before we put our uniforms on. D&D doesn't have that because that's subjective now. Like if your player dies, but they're just there to have fun, then the character death doesn't really matter. Old school Grognards lost characters every day, and they came back tomorrow and they didn't care because that was not the point. That wasn't a loss. That was just part of the experience. Whereas to the Power Fantasy player, if he died, that absolutely felt like loss. To him, that was his loss condition. So if it's not a game, you have to decide if it's a game for you. If it's not a game, then there is no objective sense of fairness that we need to cling to so that everybody is fair, so that everybody has an equal shot of achieving the win-loss condition. If there isn't a win-loss condition, then it's not a game. Then you don't need to swing for this imaginary fairness because you're supposed to.
Right.
If everybody's there to have fun, you provide them with the thing that's fun for them. So death wasn't on the table for his character. But my friend Batman, whose name is not really Batman, I'm not crazy, I promise. I mean, maybe, but not because of that, who's right next to him, absolutely wants the risk of death to be there. On one occasion, this meant that everybody died except him, and all of a sudden getting their butts back to the church to be healed is his problem, which led to some really cool stuff. And we discovered fairly quickly that he being a hero is not his bag. He left them to die. Okay. He absolutely left them to die.
Wasn't a paladin, I'm assuming.
No. Engineer.
Oh yeah, welcome to die. Like, well, the practical solution is to cut your losses. There you go.
Right, exactly. Cut his losses and ran.
Yeah,
right. He played the character. He was like, look, there's 8 of them. They're all combat characters, and I'm not. Still a combat scenario. Right. He put his hands up and went to see you.
Yeah, I would say that, I mean, there's a lot of factors there as far as, yeah, I mean, that's, I tend to make it, if there's a combat, there's a reason for that,
right,
for a big combat situation. And if I know, again, I mean, I hate the term kind of like boss fight, but at the same time, it's like, well, if it's not a serious fight, as in if there may or may not be a character death,
pull the knife, right?
Why are we even technically rolling this out?
Right.
You know, if my party of 5th level people ran into 3 ordinary Monster Manual goblins, I have to say that unless there's a real specific reason, they're gonna roll over 3 goblins. I mean,
oh yeah,
the party is well equipped to just be like, hold person, fireball, whatever. Just those guys are gone. There's almost no reason to even bother.
So I read a chart once that I thought was really fascinating, specifically about 5th edition characters. If you run CR by the numbers with rare exceptions like shadows and frost toads, if you skip things like that, then CR is designed in the player's favor. If you run that by the numbers, you can take an average, take what's a party supposed to be, 4 to 6 people. Take a party of 4. They're level 1. They fight a goblin's a quarter of a CR, so 4 goblins, 4 of them. Pick 4 classes. It doesn't really matter. Run the average damage they can do and the average damage they can take against the thing that damage it can do. Your players at level 1 have a 75% chance of winning that fight. So you could and it'll only go up from there as they get more powerful.
Right.
Because so CR is in theory mathematically equal all the time. That's the point. But CR doesn't take player genius into account. It also doesn't take player stupid into account. But
no, it's true.
So
I would also say,
math, whenever a fight starts, roll this D4, have your players pick a number. If they got it wrong, they lost. That's it. That's it. You can hand wave combat really easily.
Right.
So if you're not going to do that, it should be fun. Because you're absolutely right. 3 goblins, why are we rolling?
Why do we even take the time?
They're 4, right, just fight's over. It ends however the players say it ends.
Yeah.
If you arm wrestle Hercules, you don't roll.
Fair enough.
Hercules tells you how that fight ended.
Right.
So give your players that same power sometimes. Let them feel like gods among goblins, because they are.
Right.
Right.
Right. I mean, yeah, I'm, you know, a 5th level fighter rolling into 3 goblins that are standing and fighting. I mean, in one round, that fighter's taken down 2, you know, because he's got
sure,
2
yeah.
attacks. Boom, boom.
Right.
And then you're like, did the other one get away? Maybe, if only the fighter. You know, I mean, I've had adventures where honestly, a group of characters, there was one orc guard facing the other way, and they were like, "We'll just send the one guy over to go attack him." Now it's a 1-on-1,
Right.
and he should have won, but he did roll nat 1 on his like, I'm gonna sneak up and get him, and it was like. No, and the orc was drunk. I had made it. It was like the orc had a couple of bottles of wine sitting
Nice.
next to him. Worst guard ever. The orc still survived 3 rounds of combat against a 4th level fighter because he rolled so bad.
So there's a thing. While
The
that's
orc,
funny,
the orc was Jackie Chan doing Drunken Master. That's
Right,
like
right,
this.
so there's a really important thing I think you're touching on. While that's really funny and you're smiling and it sounds like it was fun, if it went on too long, it would be boring. So I had a party of 4 engage in combat, if you want to call it that, with 2 kobolds that took 20 minutes. Because
man.
kobolds were basically unarmed, so they were doing unarmed damage, which means they could really hurt the player characters, not really. And the players rolled 1s for 20 minutes.
Oh God.
At a certain point, it was, you know, when a comedian takes a thing that's funny and then keeps saying the same joke and everybody stops laughing, and then he does that, he just says for so long it's funny again. It was kind of like that, only then we went back down. It has to stop.
Right.
So
Unless you keep going and then it gets funny again.
But I mean, we don't have all day, you know.
That is a sine wave of, yeah.
So eventually we just hand waved the fight, and I felt bad because at the time I wasn't comfortable doing that. And if I was going to hand wave it, I should have done that 15 minutes ago. Right.
Right.
Like,
I'm if depending on the situation, I might have been like, the kobolds stop and go, "You guys really aren't into this, are you?" And then they walk away.
so that day taught me something that I hadn't really considered prior to. It went rolling. So your players, since we're assuming they're player characters and therefore grander than an NPC, assuming that's a kind of story you're running, because you don't necessarily. Some people, your player characters are NPCs. Your players are playing. They're still Joe Schmo average for now. When they're level 3, maybe not, right? But right now they're just some dude. So if we're assuming that the player character is better than the every person, then your players are starting at a resting success. We assume that they're going to win whatever fight they enter into. We assume they have the capacity to do so anyway. So they're at a resting yes, which means it become the only time they can fail is when they roll dice, because you can't roll a 1 until you roll.
Right.
Right.
So if it's a fight that they need to win, if it's a maneuver that sounds awesome, like I had so one of my players is playing an awakened owlbear named Hermes. He's a 1,200-pound walking dog. He's great. He's like, he talks like Scooby-Doo. It's brilliant. And he has these fancy boots that let him walk on anything he wants that will hold his weight, which is not that much because he weighs 1,200 pounds.
Right.
But he finds his sleeping guard and in a tree, and Hermes, the owlbear, climbs the back of the tree and rolls a stealth check, and he wants to get on the branch above the guy and then like belly flop him. Now that sounds hilarious. There's no way in hell I'm gonna let him fail. So we didn't roll dice. Like we both know what we want the point to be. You roll dice because you don't know what the outcome is, or maybe you don't want to know what the outcome is.
Right.
But
yeah, I would say like that, especially sleeping. You know, he's got all the time in the world to aim.
Right.
Then the only point of the die roll is how well of a success.
Right.
What style of success was it? A brilliantly executed. You know, some things go wrong. Though.
Magnitude. Right.
You know, yeah. Sometimes it can just. It wasn't quite as wonderful as you thought. The branch was a little springy. You
Right,
mount
right.
off, if you roll really bad. But
That same table, a month or two ago, I had a player came to me and said, "Hey, look, I have to go back to work. I can't play anymore. I feel bad.
Happens.
COVID wore off enough that I can go back to my job, and I have kids and do what I got to do." And I was like, "No, I get it. The table should never be an obligation. That you make time for it is really great, but sometimes you just can't, no matter how much you want to be there. I get it." And he goes, "But." He's playing Jason the Wanderer. He's like this big walking tank, whirling dervish of death and blades and murder. And he goes, "And I really want like an epic fight. He wants to die in battle." And I said, "Okay." The table made me agree not to fudge dice. So how are we going to guarantee that you die? And we planned out his death from what he was going to fight to where he was going to fight it, how he was going to fight it, how it was going to kill him, everything. And then I suggested two things. I said, one, do you want me to fudge dice for just you in this situation? You're the one who said I can't fudge dice for you. You're the one who can change your mind. And do you want me to include the other players in this? He said yes to the first thing and no to the second thing. And I didn't really understand why. He went, "Well, because then it'll just be for show." Yeah. It's you and a bunch of your friends sitting at a table essentially talking.
Right.
Yes, it's for show. All of it. It's make believe. Yeah. And we roll dice because we don't know or want to know what the outcome is. But in this situation, we both want the same outcome, and we both know what that outcome is. Why are we rolling dice? I don't understand.
Right.
And so eventually, he did fall in battle, and I fudged dice for the bad guys attacking him, not when they attacked anybody else. And I said, hey, since the players don't know, they went out that this is all for show. They went out of their way to try and save him. And at one point, I they should, like good teammates, right? And I sent in the chat, I'm like, "Hey, they might save your butt. what do I do if they manage to save you?" And he goes, "I don't know, have the earth swallow me up or something." Oh, okay, but I don't really want to do that because mechanically that's the same thing as saying their die rolls don't matter.
Right.
Which is if I'm just taking their agency away to alleviate, to let you have what you want. If we had just included everybody in this, that wouldn't be a problem. After he fell in battle, the next day, one of the players went, "Hey, wait a second. Guys, do you remember those big glowing green orbs we got? They're healing potions from 60 feet away. You say a person's name, you lift the globe up and you throw it, and it goes and it hits them and they heal such and such amount of hit points." And I said, "Yeah, I gave those to you 2 months ago." And they said, "Yeah, we still have those. We absolutely could have saved him." Which means he died through sheer dumb luck. If the players had been on top of things, he wouldn't have got what he wanted, or I would have had to lie to them.
Right.
And all of that could have been avoided if everybody was on the same page. And his mind went, "Wait, if we don't roll dice, then it's all make believe." Well, yeah.
Just figuring that out now.
Right. Well, yeah. So I don't know. I feel like if it's something you want to do that's really awesome, why roll dice? Why risk it?
Absolutely. I've had that too, where hey, we were getting really close to the end of a campaign, and one of the players was like, I want to play a new character. This one's kind of was meant for this particular campaign that we were doing. This scenario, this long-term
we're shifting. It doesn't fit anymore. Right.
Yeah, and it's let's take him. Let's do it. Let's not tell anybody else, because it will be and it was kind of funny because he wanted to have this they were going to fight a big giant tentacle monster and it was going to smash him or whatever, but he actually ended up drowning in a whole other situation where we were like, we'll just go with that. And the dam broke. He got caught under the water and he rolled 2 ones in a row to just try to get out from being trapped under the water. And I was like, do we just call it there? And he was like, I guess so. So not quite an epic death, but he did, the party got saved. There was this epic last moment of breaking the dam to release the water, and he goes under and never comes back up. And it was
respond to Franco's question, I suppose I haven't actually answered yet. Have I?
Yeah. No.
How many encounters
you're going well.
In a day?
I wanted to.
What I've
hit that moment though of if your players are going down into delving some unknown territory and you haven't quite planned it out totally, but the terrain is unknown by the players and unlimited as far as like you're heading into the Drow world.
They're heading to the Underdark. It's forever.
It goes on forever.
Yeah.
So although they do not know the extent, they should have some idea, and the characters should have an idea that, I mean, I guess this is that thing. Do you give everybody survival checks and say, roll survival check? Okay, you're smart enough to know that this dungeon, it just goes on forever. And you can keep rolling down there like you're Diablo and just hammering eventually you're gonna run out of, but I mean, for me, I would honestly kind of give them, I would be like, you're gonna make a survival check, and if you get a 5 or higher, you're gonna understand a little bit about this area. That is to say, it's the Underdark. It goes on forever. There are more than just Drow under here. We're eventually, if we just keep going straight down this corridor, we're gonna run out of resources and hit points because there's more of them than there are of us.
And theoretically, there's not an end to the corridor.
Right. And it just keeps going until it runs into the Drow city, which will then, of course, we will die.
Right.
So you gotta give them, you give them the hint, and you can do that again in game as well, because you give them the survival check and just say, I mean, if that's how you want to roll it, you can go survival check. You're smart enough to know that this is a bad idea.
So I do that a little differently, but I do the you're smart enough to know. Like Voss is a hobgoblin at my Monday table. He's a tactician. He's all about efficiency and Nietzscheism, and like for him, efficiency trumps everything else. So he already did the math to figure out they're working on a base, which they only have because he wants one. Like because he really wanted the base, so they have one now.
Sure.
And he figured out through like real world, he spent 2 hours crunching numbers for his character, which is insane. The same guy who plans out all 20 levels of his Pathfinder character before he plays, which hurts my brain. Anyway, making a Pathfinder character for him is a 3-day process. What?
Oh my gosh.
No. Man, if your character takes longer than 5 minutes to make, you're taking too long. like, come on. Develop them at the table, not before you get there. But anyway, that's personal preference. He figured out that crickets are the most efficient protein you can get because they breed like crazy. If you lose a bunch of them, it doesn't really matter because they breed like crazy, and they're like stunningly low maintenance. If you put them in a building that's relatively soundproof, you don't have to hear them in your town either. I was like, huh. So he's very, very drill and practice, and in combat, his driving thing is tactics. So whenever he ends up in a situation, I'm like, oh, stop. You're smart enough to know that this is an ambush point. You're smart enough to know that if you guys are going down in a cave to fight monsters, they probably have dark vision, or they wouldn't be in a cave. They would have chosen to fight somewhere else. And I don't roll for that. It's a thing he's just good at.
Right. I mean, if somebody has the skills.
Right. If you don't have a tactician in the party, then you're gonna have to.
I'm gonna say, like, if I looked at everybody's character sheet and everybody's wisdom and intelligence was below 7, then I would they'd have to make an actual successful roll.
Right.
But otherwise, it's like somebody in that group has got to be smart enough to know you got to level 4 somehow.
And I like to get creative with skills and modifiers. So I don't know how many of you, if you guys have been in fist fights or wielded weapons against other human beings, but almost any time you can make a strength check, you can make a dex check instead.
Right.
For sure.
The guy who swings a rapier, that's dex. When Conan goes like that, that's strength. Those are both melee sword attacks. Mm-hmm. Conan can use dex if he wants. His strength score is better.
Sure.
And I think so skills are interchangeable. If I'm working on building my own system, when I'm done, there'll be 3 stats in it.
Right. Now, I mean, there are, a rapier is a finesse weapon. You use dexterity. Whereas a battle axe is a strength weapon because the strength weapon is trying to hit the thing to the top of the bell,
Right.
whereas the rapier is trying to hit the target.
Right.
Exactly right.
In older editions of D&D, you had the Cavalier class.
Yeah.
Their big, or the pirate class, and their big trick was anywhere they could make a strength roll, they could make a dex roll instead. The idea was they had more mastery over their body than the thing, so that became less relevant.
Right.
And in 5e, yeah, finesse is a thing. So mechanically, Wizards agrees with me. At least to an extent.
And good reason for it.
So if you let your players, if we extrapolate from that for a second, if one of your players is a tightrope walker, that's actually a guy I had for a while. That was his. So everybody was something before they were an adventurer, right? They don't come out of the womb with a sword and a helmet. So everybody was something before they were an adventurer. I had a player who was a tightrope walker, and he argued one day that they were looking at this knot work, and he said, "Hey, I think I should be able to tell how hardy those knots are." And I went, "Okay, why?" And he goes, "Well, because I was a tightrope walker, and for like 15 years before the only reason he's adventurer is because like his group, his troop, there we go, like the whole place got burned to the ground, family died, wants vengeance, but needs money to fuel that vengeance, so he's become an adventurer."
So he's Robin without Batman.
Right.
He's Robin without Batman.
He's Batman without the money, right? Who's gonna go get it? He's Robin without Batman, exactly. And he said, "Hey, as a tightrope walker, we didn't use a net, so I fucking care, right, about the knots on the end."
Absolutely.
Of the so
as someone who also sets up slack ropes, and I've set up tight ropes a little bit, but more slack ropes.
Mhm.
Absolutely, knowledge of certain knots is definitely a thing.
I bet.
Oh yeah.
And years later, I would get the actual
and understanding load bearing.
Right. Today, I'm a knot guy. At the time, I wasn't, but I rolled with it. I had another player who was a gong farmer his whole life, which is a really fancy word for shit shoveler.
Right.
So
what is that?
One day they encounter a large cave. They hear bellowing inside, but they've never really. We're playing Dungeon Crawl Classics, so they don't. They're Joe Schmo, they're Jane Schmo nobodies. They're level 0 characters, which is my favorite place to start. So they don't even have a class yet. Like they're just whatever they were before they were entered. I think I had a baker, a gong farmer, a wizard's apprentice. He's the only one that actually had a real weapon. Like it was a good time. And outside the cave, there's a giant pile of dung. And he argued that he could tell what was inside the cave from what was in the feces.
Yeah. Extrapolate some data.
Right. And I
was might
like,
not be able to tell exactly what it was, but he would say, is it a carnivore? Is it
right? Is there produce in there? Are we looking at chunks of meat? Right. And they deduced that it was in fact a carnivore. And as he dug through the dung pile, he displaced enough of the poo that there was a big footprint underneath it. And he goes, "Well, that looks reptilian." Nope. Which is good, because if they'd gone in the cave, they would have absolutely got torn to pieces. They would have
at zero level, yeah. That is a fight for another day.
Right. Later on, they leveled up and went back to that cave because
I cannot help but think of that scene in Jurassic Park where they put the big glove on and they just put their hand in.
Yeah. The rest of the party wouldn't let it go for months. So when they eventually were level 5 or I think 6, they went back, and it was a dragon. And they died. But
they knew.
But they knew, right? And I think that happens when you give your players room to be ridiculous. There's no reason you can't be extreme and weird and bonkers and absurd. Some of the greatest stories, we remember really cool stories because they're different from all of the other stories. Which means if you're making another Tolkien, you're wasting your time. You're wasting everybody else's time, unless that's what they wanted. On the same token, when I'm saying don't roll dice, if that's what you want to do, roll all the dice. My friend Tom would let dice decide what color blue he liked. Like if he
there's tables for personality for that.
Exactly.
Like I don't which is kind of to your point. Like, well, you shouldn't take too long creating your character because if you're overthinking it, just roll the dice. There's a table for it.
If you need a personality really quick. I actually do a thing. This is way off combat, but
That's fine.
if you're
Fine.
if you're making a character or you're making some NPCs, and I, like this, because I mentioned this in a class I was teaching, and so I was like, because you might need some NPCs because your characters are speed dating through all of your NPCs, and they're like, "Hey, how are you? What's your name? What do you do? What is your job?" Okay, next guy. And they were like, "Oh, I'm totally speed dating through your next town," and I'm like, "You mother." So
Don't.
I have a tarot deck that is a really great tarot deck that has people in every single card. So it's not just like, it's not 7 swords or 7 pentacles. There are people in it. And so each one has kind of like a personality, and I'll pull a card to like get a picture of a person and kind of size them up. Really quick personality. And it's like, I don't need to roll anything, but if this person's going to be an NPC that's valuable or something, or is going to reoccur, I need to that's the 7 of Wands. That's their personality. Boom. And I can extrapolate or make a quick,
Sure.
Right.
You can make it up as quickly as they're going to forget. So
Right. So before
then,
we get back to combat, I want to talk about NPCs for 1 second because I'm a big fan. So for me, if I want to create a NPC that has a specific emotional response in the group, I want them to like him. I really want them to hate him, that sort of thing. Obviously, that's ultimately up to them. But for me, it's as easy as okay, think about all the jobs you've had. Now think about the douchiest, most asinine coworker you've ever had. The one, as soon as you looked at him every day, you went, "Oh, that guy. That guy's an NPC that nobody likes." It was that easy.
remember all the things that you hate about them and just insert them one at a time. One at a time into the character. They will absolutely hate.
Similarly, if you want think about a character that a coworker you had that you're like, man, they always knew what to say. They always made me feel better. They were the mother, father, whatever that I didn't know I wanted at my job, right? If you need as a Yoda character, boom, there you go. Do whatever they did. Take the tone they took, because NPCs be people too, right? So just reach out to you every day and be like, that guy's an asshole. She's wonderful. Boom, done. maybe don't do that if you made the ass clown out of John Smith and John Smith is across the table from you. Maybe don't do that. Right? If it's that asinine, you're probably not playing with him anyway. So.
True. I actually had an NPC that would not stop talking about their kids, and they hated them. They like, oh, dude, we don't want to know about your kids. It's like, no, my kids, they took their first steps and they're so advanced. Like, we don't care. Which was the point. That exactly was the thing. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Take people, make them NPCs.
Like I have a player that absolutely hates repeating himself on a personal, it's one of his personal pet peeves. So if I'm looking to make an NPC that he can't stand, I'll go out of my way to make a character that says, I'm sorry, I missed that. What did you say? Repeatedly, just to irritate him. Or ignore him, have a character in a book, and then look up and be like, I'm sorry, what? I wasn't really listening. And then immediately put his eyes back in the book.
I've had NPCs where this was like it was only the sidekick of the main evil dude, and for some reason the players latched on to how much they hated the sidekick. And I mean, I was like,
he's really the bad guy.
I was like, well, what about the main dude? They were like, they couldn't care less. And they were like, but his sidekick little goblin dude who and the only thing it had ever done to the players was chuck an axe at one of them and he missed. And they're like,
for some reason that really got their goat.
Oh, and then I was like, okay, well, we're playing that game. And then suddenly he kept reappearing.
Oh,
and he was like, you're pretty sure that, he was spying on you in the window. Like that was that same goblin. And he knows your movements. Now the bad guy knows what you're doing.
Right.
Oh, that guy.
So I'm a big fan of introducing a party that is, so when I was a kid, I was a big fan of Darkwing Duck. I'm still Darkwing Duck. Yeah. Remember the episode where Megavolt uses the splitter or whatever, and I was Negaduck and Posiduck? Do you remember that one?
No, but I love it already.
Okay, so Darkwing Duck gets split in half. So everyone thinks of Negaduck, the guy with the red and yellow mask, but there's actually two Negaducks. There's that one that comes from another dimension that is, in theory, Drake Mallard, but evil. That's how come his dimension doesn't have a Darkwing Duck. I think because he is that dimension's Darkwing Duck. It would make sense. Everybody else is evil, except for people that were evil and now they're good. Which would mean then that he is evil Darkwing Duck. Maybe not. Tad Stones isn't a big fan of continuity. I got no idea. I interviewed him. I asked him. He said, "Don't know." Not because he was, keeping it from me, because he doesn't know, because he didn't come up with the answer. Because it didn't matter. Anyway, I like Negaduck 1. So Negaduck 2, the one from another dimension, in theory, can choose to be a good person. He is both light and dark. The choice is his to make, and he chooses to be a butt nugget. Negaduck 1 is split out of Darkwing Duck. Posiduck over here, Negaduck over here, which means this one is completely good, and this one is completely evil, which means neither of them have a choice. This guy has to be a good guy. This guy has to be a bad guy. And that because there's nothing else in there. They're just light and shadow.
Sure.
At the end of the episode, they get put back together. And they're naturally drawn to each other, which I thought was fascinating. One, because they're opposite ends of the same coin. Two, because they're literally the same person, right? Like
Right.
They're two halves being desperately trying to be put back together, even though they don't want to because they hate each other. That episode had a real impact on me as a kid. So whenever my adventurers get hardy enough and powerful enough and famous enough, they end up encountering a group just like them. If they're two lizard folk, a dwarf and a hill giant, they encountered two lizard folk, a dwarf and a hill giant. Only they're one level higher and they're evil. Like, if you want your players to hate you, when they go to get the loot chest, have there be a note in there that says, "Sorry, suckers, get here first next time." Right? Like they will hate your guts. They will hate your guts so much. Take their gear, or better yet.
Yeah, it wasn't even it was, we had that same exact situation where they like went through all of this stuff to find the secret way to get into the secret tunnel, to get into underneath the temple of Tiamat and blah, 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 find the thing. And it was like, they got there and there was like a rock with a note under it. You were like, what? And it was from the king of this land. And he was like, but it was written to the priests of Tiamat because that's who they technically stole it from. And it was like, hey, sorry guys, you forgot you even had this artifact, so you probably aren't reading this letter, but if you are, I owe you one creepy artifact. By the way, good luck trying to get out because I set a trap for you. Bye.
Right. Right.
Yeah, so,
you remember the episode of Angel where he meets the electric lady for the first time, and they invade this like underground vault bunker thing. He has to go steal some doodad from a high-tech security firm. He did a bunch of like scoping the place out. Gun's gonna go smoosh a bunch of people in a fancy suit. They're gonna do it's a big deal. It's like a heist. And when they get there, the security system is broken. There's a bunch of sleeping security guards on the floor. But there's no damage. Just the security system looks like it's shorted out. And all the men are asleep. Well, somebody's here already, right? and Angel and his whole team go, and like they should. Right. If your players encounter a space that's supposed to have been sealed for millennia, and they have the only key, and they get there and the door's open.
Something's up.
Yeah, right, something's up. If then they
you're
discover,
smart enough to know something's up.
Right. You can be dumb as nails, and you're like, wait, the door is supposed to be magically sealed for the last 3,000 years, and it's, it's not. Like that's weird.
Yeah, I wanted to ask something about this because I was actually curious what you think about this. Is that because we were talking about combat as far as like what is you end the storytelling, and I thought that was kind of interesting because I feel like there's a lot of storytelling to be had in the combat.
Agreed.
And so I don't think it necessarily ends the storyline. I mean, it kind of like you're putting a focal point on the 4 minutes of real time that passed by. But but I think there's a lot. There's definitely a lot. And again, maybe it's more of the way that I run my whole storyline, because it's like we go into combat because something crazy is about to happen. The magical chest is being fought over, and this is really going to decide, who ends up with the magical
Right,
thing
who
at the
gets the
end.
jelly
The
beans?
good
Right.
guys or the bad guys. So you make that combat as like emotionally, full as you possibly can, because that's your high point. If it was a movie, that's your wrestling match with the big bad guy to
Right.
grab the, and every moment is wrestling with the, like, can you get to the gun before the other guy gets the gun? And then,
Right.
and so
I think there's a lot to be had as far as making your monsters talk. I think that's important, because if you play Warcraft, right, when the greenskins attack you, they go for the horde, and after a while, that's like a Pavlovian bell. That's like roll initiative. Well, crap, there are orcs here, and where the hell are they?
right.
But if they never spoke, you wouldn't have that. And I don't know. I'm sorry, I cut you off. I'm sorry.
Oh no. So I was wondering like what you thought about that, and tell me what you, how you would explain the story or continue the story while focusing on those, like, again, 3 minutes of actual game time that's supposed to go by, which takes an hour.
I think that depends entirely on what they're fighting.
Sure, absolutely.
Like goblins,
Yeah.
my goblins don't tend to talk very much, and when they do, they make like bad jokes, like little kids think they're being vicious on the playground. They throw poop, that sort of thing. They're gross, they're disgusting, and they talk a lot of trash, but that's it. They're
Right.
not. There's no deep plot revelation going to come out of a goblin. It's not going to happen. The players on the Monday table are about to invade a giant fortress covered in bandits who have siege weapons. And they're gonna watch this. Never mind. I can't say anything about that. Never mind.
They're going to go
the
into a
universe.
fluffy palace of unicorns.
Right.
And,
When they're gonna get in there, it's gonna be unicorns and throw pillows and but I think plot has I think plot can be found in the fight, not just after the fight. And I tend to do a lot of strong starts and strong finishers. So I hosted yesterday. We finished so the guys are on the quest for 7 giant spheres that I didn't understand that I turned into Dragon Balls. I didn't even think about it. But they're essentially hunting Dragon Balls. And I was like, well, crap. I feel bad now. But they're rolling with it anyway. So they've gone off to get one. And there's this period where they save these villagers, and the villagers are like, hey, thanks for the help, but we're kind of out of the way.
Oh.
I mean, what can we do for you? Like, you can't have just come here to save our butts. And they go, no, we're on the quest for blah, 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 blah. And they go, you saved our butts. We know where one of those is. You see that island over there? And they go, yeah. And they go, you could sail. We wouldn't. Like, it's not a good idea. So
the reason we haven't gone for it is because we don't.
Right. But we kind of have the doodad that travels you there. So they had giant stones rise up out of the ocean one at a time, and the players just walked to it. And then they touched it and displaced it and were immediately attacked by a dragon. Immediately. Like, it's the guardian of the stone. It immediately attacked them. It conjured out of thin air. There it is. It didn't fly from somewhere else. It materialized in thin air and attacked them. Well, it attacked one of them.
Which is perfectly fine. It is a world with magic. So
Right. Sengar is one of the player characters is Sengar. He's a dwarf. He has a bloodthirsty hatred for dragons. So while everyone else is willing to talk about it, he is not. He took a flying leap at this thing. They put fire chains around its wings. It falls into the water, but it's coming back out of the water. Sengar takes a flying leap off of the thing, snaps into its mouth. The mouth closes. I said, see you next week. Stop there. Like, because that is a much bigger energy than the goblin's dead. You got loot. See you next week. No, do that first one. Watch their plate. Eyes turn into dinner plates.
So here's the thing. Did you end the session earlier than planned just to make that dramatic thing?
No, I pay a lot of attention to what time it is, and I'll throw out little encounters or adjust accordingly. Did I plan for them to fight that dragon at the end of the session? You bet. Like, you bet.
Right.
Did I have to occasionally shuffle around how long things were going to take in order to get them there? Yeah. But usually that devolves to just shut up for a minute. Your players will talk if you give them the space to do so. Probably.
Yeah.
No, yeah, that is the thing. If you want the time to run out, don't say anything. If you want to get to the next thing, stop them from saying things.
Right.
Yeah, for sure.
If you want the time to run out, just stop talking. They will start talking. Right.
Yeah. That's it. And this is probably a really important. This should be a whole another discussion about timing, because as dungeon masters who are paid usually have a like, all right, we're doing a 4-hour session or whatever, and so you're like, when do you start that big rousing final battle? You're gonna have to start that at 3 hours and 15 minutes because the battle's going to take 45 minutes.
Right.
It's something that I've never had to deal with before until we, started doing this kind of thing where you're like, well, we're paying for a 4-hour session, or so I've started streaming my show, my D&D game with my with all the other Renaissance Fair performers who are out of work. We have a show called Nat 21 Adventures.
Yes. Did you really make a die that has a 21?
Die? It goes up to a 21 because it's
badass.
It's one more. It's one more better. So
that's very cool. So I ran a
totally
where
a takeoff of Spinal Tap, where the die goes to 21
to 11.
That's just what it does.
Right.
And and so basically so it's like, we're trying to keep it down. The session is 2.5 hours tops, so we try to get it, we're like, and I'm watching the clock the whole time, and I'm like, I have a couple of different dramatic cliffhangers that it's like, oh, we could, and then it's like, oh, suddenly we've got to that cliffhanger only 1 hour in. Okay, I have another cliffhanger.
Right. Pacing is important, particularly if you're getting paid. And one shots are a new thing for me, and that's something I usually
timing it is like
right. So I ran I have a Cyberpunk one shot that I do where everybody kind of knows up front because of the descriptive text that the final boss, if you will, is it's a mechanical T-Rex. It's enormous and it's covered in weapons and it's terrifying. Like it's absolutely terrifying. And the goal is to dismantle it or turn it off or blow up the warehouse or whatever before it stands up and comes online. Sometimes that doesn't work out. Sometimes they fight the thing. And sometimes they get there way ahead of schedule. There's a bunch of social interactions before that. The idea is you're supposed to go meet these people and they have a piece of information that you need. And the idea is you're supposed to kind of con it out of them. You do something for me, I do something for you. And the idea is that while you have agreed to help them later, it's a one shot, so that's not actually going to come up, right? So it's a just give me now. It's a freebie painted up as quid pro quo.
Right.
But last time the players just marched in, killed them all, and searched their bodies, and expected me to leave the information laying around in the letter, which I did, because they need it in order to continue. So if you have a vital piece of information, don't put it in an NPC, and then only that NPC. Somebody else knows. If a secret takes at least 2 people,
right.
So you know, if it's a letter, if it's the king's put a murder note out on you, he cannot be the only person that knows that.
Well, no, because it would still also, like you said, it's unreasonable that only one person knows a given thing.
Right. It's unreasonable. Right. Particularly in a world with magic. So that table was 5 hours. They took down the T-Rex at the 4-hour mark. Warehouse is blown to pieces. There is no mech T anymore. So instead, there also means there was no big climactic boss fight because they got to it in time. So as they left the warehouse, I'm like, well, crap, they paid for another hour. Well, shit. I didn't plan out for this. So they were attacked by the demos. The Arasaka Corporation, which built this thing, put a lot of money into making it. but most people don't put. We're talking like $1 billion. Most people don't put $1 billion into a thing without at least playtesting a smaller, theoretically less
A
lethal
mock-up version.
Right, a mock-up version. Right.
The
So as they
prototypes.
right, a prototype, exactly. So as they leave the warehouse, they are attacked by 3 warehouse building, but not warehouse-sized Stegosaurus that are mechanical. And that was the
Which
big boss fight. Big.
I love that concept, and if you made it clear to the players that that was indeed what they were, then again, like, you get to that moment for timing's sake where they're like, it trains the big gun on you, and then goes, and there's nothing a player doesn't love more than getting the one up on somebody else and being like, did the gun not go off? Oh, beautiful. I come
You poor
up
thing.
and whatever,
Right.
boom, you know, and then you're like, you just let them have it because
Right.
that's, you know, like, because it's an exciting moment too. You want those moments. I would say going back to like the storytelling of combat,
Mhm.
where, you know, what the players, nobody ever says, I beat the bad guy. Okay,
Right.
if the player told the story that way, then you really need to make your combats better.
And it was boring for them. Right.
But if they go, and then I got up on him, and then he tried to, and then I totally uppercutted him, and he went flipping over the railing right into the big molten lava.
Right.
Okay, that's the story that you want them to tell, because, and again, that's where those storytelling moments, the terrain is important.
Oh yeah.
You know, the style of combat is important. You're not just rolling dice and going 7 damage. You're not, you know, you're like, and then you get in, you slam him against the wall. He comes back with an axe swing. It goes over your head. You know, it didn't just miss. It
Right.
skimmed by you and like, whoa. And
Right.
you know,
I think combat description is a huge important factor, and I think miss for me is really important. So, no, you didn't hit that guy with a sword. You didn't stab that guy. You darted forward, tucked your blade with a satisfying into his ribs, right, and pulled out, and blood spouted out of him like a fountain. You didn't
Right.
hit that guy with a battle axe. You split him like a butterfly shrimp and varnished the floor with his blood, right? Like,
or I did 8 damage.
Franco, what?
That's a better story.
No, it's absolutely fun, and I love it. Here's the thing: I don't have the experience you guys have in storytelling, and I thought I did, but clearly I don't, because it doesn't come to me.
That actually happened yesterday. Split a guy like a butterfly shrimp and just like
Nice.
a blood fountain. But he
Now,
kept
one
helping.
thing. Now, here's the thing: the more you describe the fight,
Mhm.
you are also running the clock a bit.
There is that, right?
Absolutely.
So earlier today, when we first started with the other one, there was a question about how do I make combat dynamic and fresh and interesting, and make it faster. I actually think those two don't work very well, because the longer you explain a thing, the longer it takes.
Yeah.
So for me, brief but colorful text beats out verbose description any day. Well,
Right.
my friend Tom is, for other people, a fantastic GM. He's really great because he has a unique talent that I don't have and I desperately want, and I would carve it out of his own head if I could manage to do that without hurting him. Like he can explain a situation in like 6 words. And I got everything I needed to know, and I'm like, oh, that's cool, and that's it. So he described it. It was like I don't know, a year ago now. He described a cart bounding over the hill, filled with far too many goblins, like a clown car. Cool. That's all I needed to know. It's 20 goblins in a 10 goblin cart. I got it. I got it. That was perfect. And if you explain, like, there's in the opening of, I swear I read more than Howard. In the opening of The Phoenix and the Sword, it explains Conan sitting on his new throne of Aquilonius. He is displeased because this is boring. Like, he doesn't get to kill anybody anymore. This is incredibly boring. And it describes the throne room and the giant figure on the giant throne and the trappings and everything in like this much text, which is brilliant. And Howard's description of women is terrible, but his description of everything else is great. Like,
the brevity is the soul of wit.
right. I am not Brief. I am not.
I go on. I go on.
So would it be fair to say that it's better to describe things as a reference than to go into the detail? So, for example, you split him like a butterfly shrimp instead of saying you split the sinew of his rib cage, and as you see it split to the sides, one of the ribs goes down, and the other one takes a curve, and but
what did you? I think so.
Butterfly,
Yeah,
sure.
because what you just said was you split that guy in half, which is fine, and that's the part your players care about. You didn't hit him
And
for
again,
damage. You cut him in half.
I wouldn't go into great detail with every single hit, but
Right.
definitely the higher ranked the guy is, the more emotional investment the players have. That goblin that my players hated to death, and they did kill him.
So they hated him to death.
To death. And so like absolutely described every, because I mean every punch they put on him, because they just felt so emotionally invested in every strike on that one goblin, which by the way was a pretty high level goblin. Actually, it was,
And there's the concern that if you describe every hit, if you narrate in fantastic Howard fashion every hit, eventually you'll have to use the same verb twice, and then you're running out of gas.
Right. So knocking through a few orcs can be slightly less descriptive than when you get to that boss battle and that boss fight, and you give them an uppercut and you take out a tooth. They're just like,
Going back to your, maybe we hand wave the fight. We just narrate and move on. Here's a block from Conan fighting a bunch of people on a ship. In an instant, he was the center of a hurricane of stabbing spears and lashing clubs, but he moved in a blinding blur of steel. Spears bent on his armor or swished empty air, and his sword sang its death song. The fighting madness of his race was upon him, and with a red mist of unreasoning fury wavering before his blazing eyes, he cleft skulls, smashed breast, severed limbs, ripped out entrails, and littered the deck like a shambles with a ghastly harvest of brains and blood. There's your players, hand-waving a fight through 15 orcs. You're done. Like, they're gonna have a great time. Picture
that was at least, that would have been at least 6 rounds of combat, easy.
Right. But instead, I really do stand by what I said earlier, shrinking the hit point pool, particularly if you want it. This will do a couple of things. It'll make your combat more cinematic, because Legolas goes like that and kills 3 orcs in the blink of an eye. And in D&D, that's going to be hard to do for a while. Most goblins that my players fight die in 1 hit. Kobolds die in 1 hit. Your average bandit dies in 1 hit, 2 if his armor is really great. A dragon goes down in 8 hits.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. And if they get a critical hit, that counts as 2. That's all there is to it.
5e, the damage is so high, even at low levels. I play 4th level character, and they sit here and do 30 damage in 1 strike, and you're just like, whoa,
Right.
Well, the thing is that 4th level is, at least for D&D, it's not a low level character anymore, because most campaigns go to 10. That's it. So low level is 1, 2. 3 is when you're a competent adventurer, which is why most of the skill things come at 3rd level, and then 4th is you're almost at the halfway point of maximum power that you're going to get in the character's lifespan. So
here's something to consider that for me made a huge, like it was like seeing the Matrix. This is a big revelation for me. Leveling means nothing, not a thing, because and I can already hear the players going, well, hold on, I don't have multi-attack at level 1, I do at level 3. Yeah, but that's when the bad guys get it too. So your overall ratio of power level never changes. Initially, you're fighting 4 goblins. Now you're fighting 6 goblins. Now you're fighting 6 kobolds. Now you're fighting 8 orcs, and so on. Your ratio from damage and defense to the other guy's damage and defense, if we play CR by the book, you never actually get more powerful. It just feels like you do, because you keep getting new abilities that then match their abilities. You get big, crazy, awesome powers you can only use a couple of times a day. Well, that's what a legendary action is. You get multi-attack at level 3 and more multi-attack at level 8. So does the other guy. Like multi-attack is also, there's a great thing to throw out if you want your combat to go faster. Throw out multi-attack, compress it, do something with it, get rid of it. because if you're
Just double the damage. That's it.
do that if you want, right? So for me,
Yeah,
multi-attack
so you swung it twice. There you go.
for me, multi-attack breaks down to a couple of base components. Your player has the agency once he has multi-attack to hit more than one person on the turn. If there's a person in front of him and a person to his left, he can hit them both. In older editions of D&D, you could do the 5-foot step, which was to say you could hit a guy, then step forward a step, and then hit the other guy if he wasn't already in range when you started swinging. In 5e, you can still do that. You can split move. You don't need a
Break
feat
your
for
movement,
that.
yeah.
Right, you just do it. So if you've got 30 feet of movement, hit a guy.
So here's the thing. I rule it as written for those situations to avoid that problem, because as written, you take the action in one action. So that means that if you start the attack action, this is again 5e.
Right.
If you start the attack action, you cannot split the attack
That is true.
action.
Really?
So
that strikes me as odd.
Yes. I'm assuming that they designed it to avoid that problem.
Then your players can never be whirling dervishes of barbarian fury, moving 30
No,
feet
that's not true. So what they can do is they can move into where they could reach everyone, and then do the attack action, and then finish the rest of their movement.
That's what I meant. But if there's a guy here, and then a guy here, and then a guy here, at one point your barbarian gets additional movement speed. As a barbarian, what I want to do with that movement speed is hack this guy in half, then step forward 20 feet and use the rest of my multi-attack on the big guy.
And when you're speaking about the barbarian in particular, the barbarian gets an attack as a bonus action, which means that they do their attack action,
right.
Then they can move, and they do their bonus action, which is another attack.
Right.
So but that's class specific. That's not
right. I don't know. For me,
that's not.
Multi-attack is a couple of things. You can hit more than one target at a time. And in theory, if we're not already moving, if we're saying there's a guy in front of me and a guy to my left, in 5e, I can hit them both and then move to the other guy, and then use my bonus action to hit that other guy. So your players have no.
So not really. So even more than that. So let's say that you are 10 feet away from the first two enemies.
Okay.
You move in 10 feet. Mm-hmm. You take your action, and your action is the attack, which means that you can hit twice.
Right.
Fantastic. Then you take another 10 feet of movement to the next two. You use your bonus action to use the attack action, and when you use the attack action, you can still hit twice. Because remember that the attack.
I meant if there's a guy right in front of me, like in the adjacent square in front of me, and a guy in the adjacent square to my left, and as a barbarian, that's probably going to happen at some point. If I have multi-attack, can I hit him and the guy in front of me on the same turn?
Yes, you can.
Okay.
You can. The only thing you cannot do is split the attack action with movement. But if they're both in range when you start your attack, sure, hit them both.
Right. Compress.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
For me, that part of multi-attack is important. So multi-attack isn't just extra damage; it's also the utility to spread your damage around. Compressing multi-attack then becomes a problem because it's not just double damage doesn't address all the issues. For me, multi-attack is a huge time sink. A fighter in 5e can get 8 attacks on a turn if he uses action surge at higher level.
Right, action surge. Right.
That's insane. That's literally 7 more die rolls than everybody else. For me, that's what OP means. Overpowered for me as a defined turn means more opportunity per turn to execute your agency than the other guy. Yeah, all right, the mage can do and fireball and whatever, but he gets to roll this many times.
Right.
The fighter gets to roll this many times. What? And even if that's fair to you, this is, we're talking 7 times more time for the fighter's turn. That's ridiculous. You want your combat to speed up, lose that. Narrate that, whatever. Like lose it, compress it, narrate it, whatever you got to do to make that go faster.
So if you ever, that's fantastic. Now this is not something that I have in my notes, but something kind of worthwhile. There are rules for mob combat.
Yep.
So you can actually reverse them and then say, okay, well, you're going to attack a mob. We can use the same rules. Roll your attack roll, and that attack roll hits an average of this many people because of the DC for it, and then just roll all your damage and spread that damage around. So there you can just reverse the mob rules, and that would be one way to do the multi-attack. Yeah.
A little thing that tends to speed things up a lot, even though it's a little thing, is roll your to hit dice and your damage dice at the same time. And if you miss, just
Oh, for sure.
But roll those
And-
together. That shaves off a couple of seconds because combat's going to take longer than you want it to take. Probably no matter what.
Yeah.
So you want to gain as many seconds back as you can. Because if you got 6 players, even if you got 4 players, if you save 10 seconds per player turn, that's almost a minute you just got back.
Yeah.
Well, if I can make a suggestion, so I've been playing a lot on Roll20 because COVID.
COVID, right?
And one thing I do have is I have a notepad Windows notepad that's just pure text with the commands for Roll20 for each of the attacks of my creatures. So like, it's the bugbear's turn. Copy, paste, and on that command, it's the attack roll and the damage roll at once. So just copy, paste, copy, paste. So that's something that you can do even if you're not doing it in person. So as a tip for anyone who's watching, invest a little bit of time in just writing that out once, save it on a document that you can copy and paste. And it's the same thing as picking up those dice and rolling them at the same time. So definitely, yeah, no, for sure. And people get stuck on doing that click by click.
I think if it's something you're up for, I know lots of us that aren't up for that. Average damage saves you a lot of time. Because anytime you roll
average damage saves you time, but when I try to do that, I did try this with one of my groups. They hated it because they like rolling. There's something to rolling the dice.
There's
they like
rolling dice. So something I tried recently was player-facing combat, which I don't like, and 2 of my groups don't like, but the other one loved it, so we're probably going to keep it for them. So if the goblin, because I like goblins, if a goblin can only hit you on a 15 or higher on its die roll, then that's the same thing as saying the player is going to roll a 5 or higher to dodge if he rolls the d20 instead. You're done.
Right.
You have them roll all the dice all the time. If the goblin hits them by some terrible margin, they roll the damage die. You give them all of the dice. The big wrinkles I get here are that takes all the mystery out of it.
Yes.
And that why are you there? I go, why is there a GM then? And I don't think that second one's completely fair. I think if your GM is only providing combat, and then you play a present combat, then yeah, you don't need them. But hopefully they were doing, more than that.
Oh, the narrative is still in the hands of the narrative of the story is still in the hands of the GM. Even if in the combat you're like, okay, guys, here's the combat. Here are the enemies. The only thing I'm going to do is move them, but you're going to roll everything.
Right,
cool.
Right. So for me, player-facing combat, it doesn't necessarily take less time, but it does for players who like it, tends to get more involvement and entertainment out of them. And if things go wrong, they don't blame you. They blame the dice because they rolled them, which is nice.
True.
For me, to make things faster, I make hit points go lower. I throw out initiative. I don't include NPC combatants that aren't like a threat. I don't like to do that. If you have Captain Jack Sparrow with the cool hat and he's on the player's team and he's attacking a goblin with a rapier, I guess that would actually be a cutlass, wouldn't it? If he rolls dice and then you roll dice for the goblins, you are playing with yourself.
Oh, so what I've done with that is that any NPC combatant is under the control during combat of one of the players.
Awesome. I would say that's that next.
But 100, but only during combat. Right. Other than that, the NPC is mine.
Right. That was exactly what I was going to say. If you're going to include NPCs on their team, have them roll for them.
I usually move them. They decide the whole thing.
Yeah, I usually do especially if it's like a massive combat. There's a lot of things going on and people are fighting over certain goals. Somebody's trying to block a hallway, somebody's trying to get through a door, over there, and somebody's trying to go there. I usually will just roll a d20 and determine how well that goal is either happening or how badly that goal is happening. Nice. And it's like, okay, there's 10 guys over there fighting and 5 on 5. These guys are trying to push through this doorway and they're trying to hold it.
Right.
So is that successful? I just boom, one die roll, maybe, and we move on, because especially if it's not right in front of the players, but it might be important later.
Right.
Like, I'm the only person who needs to know. Like, we had a whole fight inside of a shop. It was hilarious because it was a magic potion shop, and so of course things are smashing and exploding potions, and people got turned into a potted plant, and people got turned into a triceratops. There was a whole nother fight happening outside between two groups of NPCs, because one group was trying to fend off the other group from actually getting into the fight. I just two kind of like a grappling. Like, whoever was getting the better die roll, because the two forces were pretty much the same force, and I'm just like, okay, they're gaining ground. All right, or nope, this round, those guys are losing ground. The players never even saw that fight. I don't have to sit there and go, Billy got a 12, and
I'm also a big fan of abstract movement. Say one of your players is a scout and he's just faster than the other ones. I had a player specifically design his 5e character to be the Flash. Wicked fast. Wicked. Had like 120 movement speed. He was stupid fast for a 5e. Now, in 5e, mechanically, that actually doesn't have a whole crap load of benefit. But he wanted to do it anyway. It's like there's a bunch of feats that, since D&D is mostly geared towards combat, and you can run it however you want, but the majority of the rules in that book are to do damage to other things. So ultimately, it's a damage simulator. It's a combat simulator that you dress up with story and exploration. But most of the rules aren't actually for that. They make you do all that. The system is designed for party A to kill party B. They put the rest of that on you, which is cool. That's my favorite part. but the book is, 300 pages, and 180 of them are how to kill other things. So for me, abstract movement does a lot for one, making you stop counting squares. Don't do that. Get rid of those. You don't need those unless your player is casting something like Fireball, a magical effect. Mages tend to care, but lots of other characters don't. If when a barbarian says, is he within, how close is he? What he wants to know is, can I hit him, or can he hit me this turn? If the answer is no, he's far away. That's it. Like, I tend to break combat into 3 zones. What's happening right here? So like in the bar, in the bar, there's a fight, and guys are throwing cups and bashing people's heads off the bar, and tables are getting thrown, that sort of thing. And there are player characters outside the bar, which could in theory shoot into the bar, but they have to move into the bar to use any melee attacks. And then there's the range outside of that. That's it. You can move from zone to zone on your turn. That's it. You don't move 30 feet. You move from zone to zone. This also means that if you have a player who's a lot faster than the others, and he gets in combat, your players don't spend a couple of turns going, well, I move 30 feet. I move 30 feet. I move 30 feet. Great. He takes his turn that's all full of action and badassery, and then we get back here, and I move 30 feet, and I move 30 feet. That's not fun. Like, hand wave that. They're there, right? He's taken, he's gunned down. He's got a sword like up at his neck. You guys need to save him now, right? Like that sort of thing. And maybe next time he'll learn not to use all of his movement speed every turn, because he'll run into something that he can't win against. For me, abstract movement does a lot to speed things up. Now, unless you have players who want hard math, and then all you're going to do is irritate them. I have a couple of those.
So I have to ask. Yeah. I have to ask, because this is actually one of the questions that I have here. Is we're all
look at your notes.
We're all no. That's fine. The thing is that we're all playing Dungeons and Dragons, or we're all playing Pathfinder, or whatever it is.
Something that is basically Dungeons and Dragons, right?
At what point do I have to tell my players, like, hey, and especially again if you're going to be a paid DM, this is super important. It's like, hey, we're playing Dungeons and Dragons, but we're not doing any of that.
Identity question. For me, it doesn't matter. It doesn't. 5e is not that. So for me, all 6 editions, that's right, 6 editions of D&D look the same. They're all the same, with the exception of 4th edition, in that it is mechanically designed to be Warhammer 40K when you control one guy, because so a lot of the rules are different. If you want to play Risk as one troop, 4th edition is your game. It's just not very D&D-y. It's a hardcore simulationist thing, though, which is how come you want minis and how come they designed it to sell minis and things like that. But all the other editions of D&D all look the same. Original edition, 1st edition, 2nd edition.
Now, here's the thing, and the question goes more for this. When you're advertising your game, because you want customers, literally, what do you tell them you're playing?
Well, that depends on what system I started with. It's really not, I mean, at your table, does drinking a potion take an entire turn? Does that take your whole turn? Because that's how that works.
Again, and here's the thing. So I'm only my only expertise is D&D 5e.
Right,
so please pardon if I'm.
No, I got it.
It doesn't really take a whole turn. It takes to interact with objects.
Okay.
Now you can use your action to do a second interact with object during your turn, which is why people say it takes a whole turn to drink your potion.
Right. It doesn't actually
what you can actually do is you can swing your sword, which is your action, and then you interact with object, grab the potion out of your backpack. Right. And then the next turn, swing your sword as an action, interact with object, drink the potion.
But on that same turn, you could move through a door, a closed door, as part of your movement action.
If it's closed, no, because again, your interact with object would be open the door.
No. You go back and read that. You can, during the description where it talks about movement, what you can do in your movement step, it includes move through a door. Which I'm like, wait. Now, obviously, let's cut out doors that are so heavy you need to make a strength check to move them. Runs and interrupt your normal flow of movement. But if you're Conan, that's no door, right? Like that's no door.
I'm assuming that you mean a door that's latched. It doesn't have to be locked, but a door that you have to actually do something to. You're not just pushing it open. I mean, it's closed.
If it's pushing it open, I'm talking about.
If it's just pushing it open, that's part of your movement. That's absolutely
right. But that's
if it's latched, then that's your interact with object.
If and you don't necessarily have. Yeah, I can have my sword drawn, advance towards an enemy I can see through a hole in a door, push what's left of the rickety ass door out of the way, and then attack him all on one turn. So what I just did was I moved 30 feet with one of my hands occupied by a weapon, and I did something with my other hand that didn't really require me to look at it or pay a lot of attention. If I've drank potions before from places that live on my belt that hasn't changed, I argue that is the same amount of give a crap from your point of view. So how come that one takes an action and the door doesn't?
And this takes us into tactics, which kind of plays off of that is actually what plays off of the question is, what are we playing? Mm-hmm. So the reason that tactics are important is because then it's less ambiguous about what you can do, and you have to plan your turns. And that's true also because you know that the dungeon master has to play by the same rules. So you can, as a player, start thinking, okay, regardless of how we flavor this, if I use my empty hand or if it was in my belt or in my backpack, I know I have to use this resource to get this other benefit. And so that's where the discussion of tactics kind of leads into what system you're using. Are you using the 5e system? In which case, it doesn't matter how you flavor it. These are the rules of what you can get away with every turn. So now that is, again, if you're going to hand wave that, then are you playing? You're playing Dungeons and Dragons no matter what, because this is all in the realm of homebrew. But when you tell your clients, when you tell your customers, you can tell them like, okay, build your character, but I'm playing with these additional things. So when you build your character, take that into consideration. Because if you're thinking that you're going to play with these rules as they come in the books, you're going to build your character tactically around that. Whereas if I'm homebrewing so much that this doesn't matter anymore, I should tell you, like, we're playing an adventure tabletop. These are the rules, and it's completely different.
So system identity is weird for me. So for me, raw, read as written, is ultimately Wizards of the Coast current interpretation of the rules. The rules change rules. I'm going to use that word loosely. So Wizards of the Coast does not do the kind of playtesting people think they do. I don't know.
Oh
why
no,
people think
no. They outsource that a lot, and
when they
even
things
currently.
like that spell has proven to exceed our expectations. What they meant was, well, crap. That's what they meant. Which mean, and I'm not harshing on them. Really badass open world video games. Ghost of Tsushima came out not that long ago. It's amazing. From a technical point of view, it's incredible. A game that big that loads that fast, we're talking like a couple seconds. If that thing gets remade on the PS5, it will have no loading time. Amazing. And it's massive. And holy crap. But there, in open world experience, there are going to be bugs. A tabletop game like D&D is an the openest open world experience, but we still need to deliver framework, which means little systems are going to collide with other little systems, and there's bound to be a glitch, an oversight, something in there somewhere, and that's fine. I'm not harping on Wizards. It is not possible for them to account for every last little thing all the players can think of. There's 8 of them. There's no way in hell they can do that. But what I am suggesting then is that 5e is not perfect, and no edition of D&D was perfect. None of them.
Oh, for sure. No simulation of any type will ever be the world, because if you simulated the world, you'd not be simulating it. It would be it.
Right. It would be it. Exactly. You are at your very best have a second-rate version. Right. Because worse than that is third-rate. So I was watching the Secrets of Blackmoor documentary, which showcases the original Paladin and the original Dwarf, and the guys who made D&D for the very first time, which predates both Gary Gygax and David Arneson to some extent, which is fascinating. And then there's a period in the beginning where they're first playing Napoleonics, which is like war games, which D&D grew out of. It's very cool. And nerdy as hell. Like, oh god, it's nerdy as hell. But anyway, there's a period where one of the guys is talking to the camera guy, and he goes, it's kind of like when you play poker. We went to Jimmy's house, and we knew that aces were wild, and when we went to Tommy's house, we knew they weren't. That's it. That's become the first 3 editions of D&D, the Menser Red Box, the Beckme box, and then the other one I always forget the name of. We're all not the same, but no one argued whether or not they were D&D. They were completely different. Dwarf race and class were the same, and the other one, so you didn't play an elven
My first character was an elf.
Right.
That was the class.
An elf, right, because it was the class. Exactly.
I was an elf.
But at the time, nobody argued that Menser was D&D and Beckme wasn't. I have no idea where that came from, and it needs to stop.
No, I don't.
D&D, if you say it's D&D, that's it.
I agree. But what I mean is, from the sales perspective,
I understand.
Right. Part of the question is like, when you are advertising yourself,
right.
Do you say, because I would say that, and of course, depending on what it is, because usually it's a one shot, it's a birthday party for a teenager. You say this is going to be a high adventure. You're going to go fight a dragon. That's all you have time for.
Right.
It's one shot. It's like you're already on your way to the dragon's lair. Honestly, if you're going to do a 4 and
right.
4.
So if the question is, if I'm not going to play raw, then what do I call it? I think.
What do I tell my clients?
Right.
So I don't piss them off.
Well, what would you tell your friends? It's 5e, but I tinkered with it. Here are my changes. Be as transparent as possible. Yeah. Be like, look, here's what I changed. And if you have the time for it, if you think they're going to read it, if you can provide it without being super wordy, because they haven't paid you, in theory, they haven't paid you yet. So if you bore them, they might not, right? So you know that document to be incredibly long. But be upfront. Be like, hey, look, I think initiative is dumb. We're not using it. Here's where
that's huge, and that's a big jump. That you should definitely tell. One of my biggest rule changes is the death saving throw. I think is boring, and so I do a thing that's slightly more mathy, but also it's streamlined, so it kind of works out. You do negatives. You go into negative hit points as far as your constitution is.
I remember that. Right.
And and so you can get knocked in, and then you make a constitution save depending on how far down you are. uh, and you can actually stay conscious, but you're crawling. You're
Right.
you're
like the end of God of
clobbered.
War 3 when he's leaking all that blood, but he's still alive, right?
Right, and that leaves you the opportunity to like, can you grab that lever that is going to save the party and drops the drawbridge or whatever, because you're just not out. And then it's like, because I just think it's so kind of arbitrary to roll 3 dice to see if you're dead.
Right.
And
So
it's
for
like-
me, we do death like this. When you hit zero, we don't have negatives or anything like that. When you hit
Mhm.
0 life, you drop. You roll a 6-sided die at the end of your turn. Because excuse me, at the beginning of your next turn. Chances are you didn't drop on your turn. You got attacked on somebody else's turn.
Right.
So when your turn starts, you're going to roll a d6. You have that many rounds till you're dead. That's it.
That's great, and that's also like that same like you got a heroic. You can do it. You've got a couple rounds to like crawl over. Maybe you can heal yourself. Maybe somebody else can heal you.
Right.
But you're back in the action.
So
and
for me,
especially if it's a paid game, nobody wants to sit out for the last 7 rounds of combat while your friends are fighting a dragon, and you're just sitting going,
right.
Oh,
During that
well.
D6 drain, say you roll a 2. For those two turns, you can move at half your movement rate and attack. You can do all the things you could normally do, just not as well. Everything's a disadvantage. Because we've all seen the action movie where the guy gets riddled with holes and he's gonna die, but he kills 4 more bad guys before he goes, yes. And hits the ground.
Part of the thing, or like gets that final shot in, or able to get the drop on somebody.
You want your players.
It's more theatrical. It's just more. It's just a better, more movie ending.
Right.
Which is what I would go for.
You want your players, if the player wants to survive, another player has to come up to him and make an intelligence or a wisdom roll, his call, the healing player's call, and then say something 80s like, "Don't you die on me, man." And if he makes the save, you're alive. That's it. You have 1 hit point. We're good to go. Right? Tell my wife, I had another wife. Tell yourself, get up. Right? That kind of thing.
Don't you die on me, Mel. Yeah, that's
Right.
great. And it gives the other players who are still up a chance to that moment. They all want that moment. They all want, or they want to die heroically.
Right.
Nobody wants to just, you got shot by an arrow and you crawled in the corner and
That's
died.
lame.
That is not heroic. That is not, that is, you want to be able to pull the lever to drop the
drawbridge and save your party. Right.
Allows the cavalry to roll out and save the day, or whatever it is.
And
so so it's like that's one of my huge rule changes. And I let people know that's
exactly right. I switch out from death saves to this. I got that from Nick's card RPG. Hank's a goddamn genius. But it's something you need to tell people if you're going to make big alterations to the game. I think a lot of time you'll catch, well, that's not D&D anymore. Sure. And 3rd edition had alignment and 5th edition doesn't. Shut up.
Right.
D&D changes all the time. It mutates.
I mean, I used to say this, because I mean, back in my day we had THAC0 and we liked it, and first edition, and it was AD&D. Well, and then they started coming out with 2nd edition and blah blah blah. And I was like, well, I'd already modified 1st edition so hard that my players called it PD&D, which is Paulo's Dungeons and Dragons.
That's great.
And just like a speed factor for weapons. Get too much technical jargon. It just chucked it all out the door.
Like
streamlined it, did other things with it.
Oh yeah.
And
I'm not
and
a
so
huge
yeah.
fan
So you're like,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. So yeah, just I modified it so much, and then now we're in 5e, and that's what the kids are doing. So you got to do 5e, and but I still like, no, I still don't like death saves. Nope. I still.
They're goofy and arbitrary, and I don't like them. Right.
I still chuck them all out the door. So
Say change whatever you like, but yeah, tell your party if it's tell whoever's going to pay you. Be as transparent as possible, just like any other business.
And likewise, I've had kids parties, the group of kids that I have a kid who's 13, plays with a wide range of players, and I'll ask them, do we want to, what's this adventure we have, because now of course we're doing it on Skype. So again, we're like, we are setting down a time frame and everything. What do you want this adventure to be? Because it can be whatever you want. And are we gonna go hardcore against some goblins? Or are we gonna discover a mystery? Is this gonna be more Scooby-Doo? Is this gonna be? Do you want to go shopping? I'll make an interesting. I've got the town already set up, and I've got a ton of interesting, shops and things that, the druid who's a florist has killer plants.
Right.
And
poison ivy with a hat. Right.
You can spend an hour in that shop role playing all the things that happen, So as far as a selling point, I absolutely say, who are we? What is the age range, and what is the adventure you want to have? Because you don't want to give them something they don't want. If you're like, I want you to fight these goblins, and they're like, we want to adopt the goblins because they're cute. All right, you've messed up.
Onto something there. I think particularly all of my tables are custom all the time, and not because I want to do all that extra work, although that is me, but mostly because I'm hosting for them. I'm not hosting for me.
Absolutely, you're not DMing for you. You're DMing for them. So you give them the product
DMing
they want.
For me, I'd go play a Final Fantasy game.
Right. So you read them, you ask them the questions, you have them fill out a survey on Google Docs, whatever it is to read them so that you can do the homework before the game ever starts.
And then you're like, applies to rules too. If they want to play 5e by the book, okay.
I'll give you a list of other dungeon masters.
Right. I am not going to have any fun. And since I'm not going to have any fun, that'll come through, right? So I have a couple of guys who love to play 5e raw. Franco, I will tell them about you.
So here's the thing. What I do is I create rules that aren't in the books for things that aren't covered.
Okay.
So, but I normally, when I tell my players, like, make your characters, optimize them as ever you want, because we're going to go by the rules, which means that I'm not going to spring on you like, oh, that thing you spent all the time optimizing for, we're not going to do it that way. Like, no, that's not why they did that. See what I mean?
See,
for example,
go ahead.
One thing that I can pass on to this is what I ruled for illusions. For example, one of my the little illusion that was the baby thing.
Right.
The first illusion this player cast was a dog barking caught in the web, because he wanted the spiders to go towards that and say, okay, you cast your illusion, the dog is barking, and they can hear it and they can see it there. The spiders don't go for it. Why not? Because the spiders feel the pull on the web. So it was perfectly well executed. It was just a bad idea. So it's not because it's an illusion that it didn't work. It's because you didn't think this through. And then the next one is like, okay, I have a baby displacer beast, and it'll, at least if it won't fool the spiders, but it'll fool the displacer beast. Fair enough.
Okay.
But the rules say that once you disprove an illusion, you no longer believe it to be true.
Right.
And I think that is a terrible thing for someone who is playing an illusionist wizard, because, well, what does disproving it mean? It's ambiguous enough that here's how I handled it. All right, if you do something that would disprove the illusion, like put your hand through it, this is a world with magic. So you are going to do an intelligence check, just like you normally would, versus the spell save DC of the illusionist caster. And every time you disprove that illusion, you get a +1 bonus to that roll. So eventually you're going to notice that it's an illusion, but it's not necessarily the first time you interact with it.
Right.
So that's not in the rules, because the rules don't tell you how to deal with illusions.
Right.
So I don't change the rules, but I do fill in the gaps. And those are the things that I bring. But hardly ever do I contradict the rule as it's written, not because I think I agree with it all the time. Sometimes I think those rules were, someone thought it was a smart idea, but I don't think so. But what I do know is that the player thinks that that's what we're going to use. And again, that goes back to tactics. That has nothing to do with the ambiance. It has nothing to do with the story. It has to do with, okay, the mechanical part, I optimized it because I thought we were going to do this. I bring a Ferrari to a go-kart race. I brought the wrong car.
Right.
You know what I mean? That's the same thing.
Right.
That's the reason why I don't deviate from the rules as much as possible simply because it's the expectation of the players. They came to play this particular game with this particular rule set, which is why when I say I play D&D 5e with my characters, with my players, that means that when you make your character, I will respect the way you optimize it.
Right.
Right.
See, for me, those don't have to be the same thing. And I think that's ultimately up to the players. So a friend of mine, Chris, does not do rule of cool. Absolutely not. No way. If you come up with a cool idea and it disagrees with the rules or the physics or whatever, you will not do it. Absolutely not. It being cool is not enough for it to occur, which I really don't like. I don't like that at all. But Chris looks at the structure of the games he plays, the rules, and goes, okay, how do I succeed within these parameters? My friend Tom does the same thing, where I look at the 300-page 5e book and go, wow, that is an awful lot of things I can't do. That's 300 pages of shackles and chains. Tom and Chris see those as the edges of the sandbox, and you have to play in the sandbox, and that's the challenge. It's a puzzle. They look at all the pieces and go, okay, how do I get what I want within the framework designed without breaking it? I'm allowed to push up against it, and I'm gonna, but I'm not gonna break it. For them, that's the fun part. For me, that sounds horrible. For my friend Valis, who's playing the Hobgoblin, he wants structure. We're playing Five Torches Deep, which is a very OSR inspired 5e clone. It's you can use any 5e book you want and any old school D&D first edition second book you want with it, just the way it is. If you're being nice today, if it's a monster, it cut its hit points in half. But aside from that, just the way it is. And it's like 18 pages. It's this big. That's it. It's a tiny little thing. And he memorized the book. Of course he did. And we've agreed, and I mean you can actually memorize that. Unlike, say, the 5e Player's Handbook, that's 300 pages. You'll memorize it by attrition eventually, but through playing it, I can memorize this before we start, and I did. And then because he's had a bunch of bad experiences with hosts who said, "What's the matter? Don't you trust me?" I don't use the rule of cool for him unless he's really excited and it's only going to benefit him. That's it. But which I think, I don't know, for me, the identity of 5th edition or 4th edition or whatever is less important than, like you said, what your players are expecting to play in. If they're expecting 5e and all the rules that come with it, then yeah, changing them without telling them is disrespectful and kind of rude. But if they don't care, like you'll go on Roll20 and you'll see rule of cool host, raw host. That's all you really need to say. Well, system raw. What's the
Sure.
say?
Yeah.
But
Call of Cthulhu is not the same.
Right. Exactly. Right. Well, what? Right. Like.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I would say, I would flavor heavily on the rule of cool.
Oh yeah.
And just, yeah, I mean, I've got the basic, the basic rules as far as combat really is the real structure, because again, it is the life or death of your character that you're playing, and you might be very emotionally involved in your character and you don't want it to die. Right. So clearly you want to know what's going to kill it and what's not. And but again, it's, I mean, and I usually do rule of cool falls into the players surviving, because we're trying to tell a good story, especially if it's, if you're being paid to be there for this group of people. And I'm not saying that it doesn't sometimes end in some character death, but it's going to be a good death. Right. And not just, I got downed by 3 goblins. And that's the end of the story. Like, that's the end of your story. Like, right.
Like, if I'm running a Cyberpunk one-shot, Cyberpunk is mathematically intense and it's gritty, and the whole idea is that you're gonna die. Like, Cyberpunk isn't a world of heroes, and it's not a world of people who are looking to change things. It's a world of people who want to live till tomorrow, and that's all they hope to achieve, because that's a lot of work. So in Cyberpunk, I don't fudge dice, and if I do, it's because I turn the damage up, not down. But that's, for me, that's player expectation. So when I fudge dice, I do it for the player's best interest, which sometimes means turn the damage up. Dragons do not roll ones. Absolutely not. That's lame. Nobody wants to see that. maybe once for comic effect, then never again. Like, if similarly, if your kobolds keep rolling natural 20s, lie. Like, your players don't want to die to kobolds, lie.
Right.
Like, but Cyberpunk is an intense game. I am absolutely engaging in the us versus them mentality if I'm hosting a Cyberpunk table. If you sleep in the same place twice, don't. Watch your back and the air and the ground. Like, I am gunning for you the entire time because that's what we agreed to play, because it's kind of in the social contract of Cyberpunk. Whereas if a player comes to me and says, hey, I want to play in a neon future, but I don't want to be the meat grinder that is Cyberpunk, excellent. ICRPG has a wonderful subsystem for you that I'm forgetting the name of right now. It's the fantasy bit. It's the dragons are neon now, but it's still that kind of mentality. But this is just a conversation you have with your players. Phase 0 is important. I don't charge anybody until we've had one of those, and then maybe a demo table after that.
And then now that we're in the world of kind of social distancing and otherwise, I'm assuming that those are all now done online anyway.
Yes. Yeah,
so it's a lot less investment of your time for transport and taking materials and that sort of thing.
Right.
Definitely. So, all right.
Oh yeah.
This
travel kit is important.
I'm gonna say the same thing that I always have to say, is that unfortunately we could do this all day. Believe me, we could do this all day. But given that it's a little bit past noon, we're gonna at least noon where I am, and we started at 9 a.m.
Yeah. So we're gonna have to wrap this up.
We're gonna have to wrap this up. But the only thing I kind of want to point out is that for all the combat that we talked, tactics seem to be the least heavy part, because it's the thing you adapt at the table, or at least that's what I'm picking up.
Yeah.
So whether it be Dungeons and Dragons, Cyberpunk, or otherwise, it's what you think is going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
If it's worth your while, you roll it, and if not, you just narrate it. So at higher levels, you narrate how you kill those kobolds, but at lower levels, you actually fight them.
Right. So for me, you mentioned earlier that you didn't have your monster stat block in front of you. So yesterday, players fought a dragon. I knew that they would at least encounter the dragon, if not fight the thing. I put a big shiny carrot in front of them that they're going to go touch it. They're going to just pick it up and walk away with it like it's no big deal. I kind of hoped that they would be like, okay, it's in a giant stone crown in the middle of the ocean, and there's like a guardian people out in the middle of nowhere that happen to have the magic doodad. It smells like a trap, but none of them got that. So they just walked over and picked it up like $20 you found in your jeans. Like, whatever, cool, sweet, right? And they were attacked. No kidding. So here's my stat block I had for the dragon. I wrote down how many hits it takes to kill the dragon, how much damage what damage it does for its attacks. I said, it has bite, it has a breath weapon. Actually, I didn't write that down at all. It says breath weapon, and then I wrote what that is. It's fire breath. It's green, because I felt like changing it. It has this many hits. I wrote a visual description. It is this big. It has wings. It has a tail. It has this many hits. That's it. That's all I wrote. Oh, and it guards the orb. That's it. So in theory, once I start playing, it's a dragon. A dragon's going to conjure in my brain. I needed to write down that his wings, because I watch a lot of DBZ and they get dragons in there with their wings. So I needed to remind myself what kind of dragon we were playing with. But then it's a dragon, so we know what it looks like and what it's fighting for. For the orb, it will do anything, including die. If I wrote a goblin stat, goblins. Crafty almost always has something weird. 1 hit. That's it. That's the entire descriptive text. I don't have any numbers written there aside from the 1 hit. I might write something like cowardly. Maybe. For me,
will flee if in danger.
Right. Will absolutely leave its friends to die. Right. I don't know. For me, ultimately, all combat boils down to what they're fighting, what the capabilities of the thing they're fighting is, and why it is fighting. That's it.
Their goal.
Fight to defend the hive. That dragon fought to defend the doodad. Mothers gain incredible strength when they're fighting to save their young. At least human mothers. Apparently not.
Except the ones that throw their young.
Right. Because Quackle mothers do traps, right? Hug it like a baseball. Sorry, Timmy. You just run up. That's terrible. So yeah, if we're gonna try and compress all combat ever down to just a couple of sentences, for me, it's the capabilities of the thing and why it's engaging in combat in the first place. That's it.
Yeah. And you know, you're telling a story. You're telling a story, and you're trying to make it exciting. And that's, I mean, I hate to say, well, don't make it boring. That's, you know.
Right. But it's good advice.
But yeah, it's like, well, how, of course, and it's like streamline, move ahead. You fudge dice to tell a better story and not to make it worse on anybody or not to make it easier, but to tell a good story. So,
Right.
Yeah, is there one, I don't know, there's one bit of advice, but if you're thinking of it as a movie and that action is moving and, sometimes the hero is going to miss because it drives the drama even more. Cause you're like, I rolled an 18 and I missed. And you're like, yeah, like that big bad guy is bad. And,
Right.
Now you're like, oh, this suddenly got real. I got to use every resource.
Right. If you're playing James Bond and you can't seduce the lady, something's up, right?
Right.
Kind of what he does. If you're Sherlock Holmes and you're presented with a puzzle and the GM doesn't just tell you what the answer is, and then
something's up, right?
And something's up, right? Because Sherlock can get every puzzle on the first swing because he's friggin' Sherlock Holmes.
Right.
So we come back to the same thing we did with the skills. Only roll if there's a chance of failure. But if that's what the rogue does, the rogue opens the lock. That's what he does.
For me, right.
That's
For me,
right.
only roll if failure would be interesting. Only roll if failure matters. The chance for me to fail walking across this room is actually pretty great. But no one cares when I stumble and fall. Right. Not even me, because it happens that often.
Yeah, I will purposely, and it depends. I mean, these are all very arbitrary things, but I'm usually like, if there is a chance of failure, that DC is so low, I'm basically just say, don't roll a 1.
Right.
Exactly.
And
just don't roll.
And then I don't care. I don't honestly.
Right.
It's like we didn't want to fail. It's just gonna extend the story longer. But if you do roll a 1, I'll make it funny. So,
exactly. Right.
If the rogue is climbing a sheer 50-foot surface with no rope and no nothing because he's Spider Monkey the rogue. Well, he's a rogue. He just does it. Is he under attack? Like people are throwing fire at him and arrows and crap. Well, maybe now he rolls. Is it
because the situation warrants? Yeah.
Right. Is it 2 a.m. and it's pouring rain and he's not familiar with it? He can barely see it, and he's under attack. Yeah, all right. Now you roll. Right. Like now you roll. Now it matters.
And if he is high level, honestly, he'd still have to roll a 1 to even fail. Because he's still got a
18.
Yeah, he's still got a plus 27.
Right. He's climbing it. Is he climbing it without catching an arrow in his ankle? Is really what you're after.
Right. Level 18 thief is going to be he is the Batman that shows up and leaps up onto the top of the gargoyle and because
brings the dude up there with him, does that thing, the inverted takedown, snap.
Right.
Which brings me to my point. Which is the only thing I wanted to tell Jay is that leveling up does matter because it just means you've rolled less.
This is a good point. This is a good point. But I would argue that it is the thing you are engaging with that decides whether or not you roll.
Yeah,
in theory, your player gets smarter over time and picks.
Right. And as Jay said earlier, you get to 18th level, but so do your problems.
Right. So do your problems. Right.
So you're probably rolling.
More levels, more problems.
You're probably rolling just as many times during a game. It's just that your problems are different because those 5 kobolds, you just go, yup. That wasn't the problem. That wasn't the problem the DM is giving you.
I'm a big fan of throwing like little level 1 gimme threats, like 7 goblins at a party of 6 level 20 adventurers every now and again. Let them, flex their muscles and feel really powerful. Let them shit kick 15 goblins down the hallway. They'll have a blast. Just don't do it every day, or there's something
Right.
bad about it. Like,
Yeah, because that story could be, how would you like to kill them?
right, right, right.
Right.
Well,
Just
are you killing?
describe to me how you kill them, and that's it.
Right.
No rules
Right, right.
necessary. That's fine.
And if that's the same goblin tribe that when they were level 1 killed a bunch of their previous characters, yeah, all right. Is that metagaming a little? Maybe. Is it cathartic for your players? You bet. Give it to them.
Yeah. It's more
There's
fun.
still
anyway.
goblins. There's still
Right.
a problem. Like, so this is
All right, guys. So lastly, the only thing is I have to ask Paula, are you in a hotel room? You're not home, right?
I am. Yeah.
Yeah.
Surprisingly, I had a show last night, so I'm
Fun.
in the hotel.
So can I assume that you have your juggling stuff with you, and you can give us a quick demo?
I'm
you know
not
what?
against
Actually,
that.
all of it's all at the stage. Oh, except for maybe some beanbags. Hang on, wait. So, no, wait. Hang on. Somewhere.
Totally
now
put 'em on the
that
spot
is
on that one.
obviously a hotel room, isn't it? I didn't even notice.
So yeah, so everything else is actually at the stage right now,
Ooh,
but
4 at once.
just
Wow. I have been trying to learn how to juggle for years and haven't been able to.
You see that? Once he's done, they go back in the bag. He
Yep.
didn't even look.
they actually all went back to the stage.
He doesn't have to roll. He can just do that. He's the juggler.
Right.
That's of
He
course.
just does it.
He just juggles.
No.
That's what he does.
I save up my skill checks for like when I'm on TV. You know?
For sure. All right, guys. This has been a lot of fun. Thank you. Next time, I propose that we do a stream about narrative technique because it does seem that it's something that does need to be explored. And if you're going to make a story interesting, whether it be combat heavy or combat light, how you describe things and engage, I do believe is what we kind of saw that is the meat and potatoes of it, really.
Absolutely.
I'm
All right,
trying to get the group to engage and tell me a list of things they want for the Q&As, and I get a little bit of feedback, but not a lot.
Don't worry too much about it. Put up some good content. We'll take some notes about it, and we'll see how it goes. And the worst case scenario is, if nothing else, we here I'm getting a lot out of it.
Oh,
So,
good. Oh, good.
yeah, for
Talk to
absolutely
them, see you
sure.
later.